Hello out there, and welcome to another debate dissection with your boy Mark Reed and the delightful Better Than Ember. Ember, how are you?
I'm okay. It's been
Hmm.
a hell of a week, but feeling pretty
Oh,
good. Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I am very tired though. I've had a great last debate. That was just a few days ago. And yeah, it's been fun. But this is the continuation. If you're wondering, we dissect debates here over on the reading room, where we're going to give this one another autopsy because we did a part one, but we never got to part two. Now, a couple of things to go through. I wanted to dissect the presidential debate. I don't want to sort of put it onto your choice, which is next week. So I was going to do a midweek special, a geriatric edition of debate dissection on the presidential debate because I do want to do it, but I do want to finish off this Alex O'Connor one. I realize we're getting way behind, and there's some amazing debates. But
It's
my
good
audience sort
news.
of yeah, my audience sort of suggests they'd like to see it, so I'm going to run a special edition to just to cover that one. So if you are interested in that, I will be doing that for your delight and disgust. And I want to give a big hello to Robin. Hi, Robin. I hope you're feeling better. Robin was not feeling the best, but I really hope that you're feeling better and doing well. So where did we leave this one? I think we left this one kind of Dinesh wasn't doing well. Let's put it that way. It
Mm-hmm.
was not. It was not going brilliantly. Um, yeah. So we found the exact frame in which we left it, and I do like my in-screen version. But yeah. So thanks for joining us. Yeah. What do you have coming up, Ems? Have you got anything on at the moment?
Oh, a bunch of stuff. Just did a
Hmm.
premiere right before this to, uh, kind of
Hmm.
bring audiences together. We're on each other's channels every week, but always looking for a good spot to put a premiere, and none of them have really
Hmm.
caught. So I'm like, let's try doing it here and moving people over. So there's fresh
Okay.
content over on my channel for people for later. I've
Hmm.
got a out of schedule video coming out on Monday. I was over on
Okay.
Jay Bundy's doing a stream with him about these sham doctors that made a statement about trans healthcare. And so
Hmm.
it was a long stream. So I have distilled it down. I've edited it into just the most key bits, and that'll be coming
Right.
out on Monday. Um, Thursday, of course, I'm over on the transpositions for
Yes.
news and fun
Mhm.
topics. Friday, Transpositions is doing a 200 subscriber special. If you're not subscribed,
Oh,
please
nice.
do share with your friends. But yeah, it's growing.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's quite fast actually. Yeah, congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then next Saturday, the day after my Saturday,
Mhm.
because Mark and I are on opposite sides of the world. Mark will
It
be
is
back
true.
over at my place for more debate stuff. So yeah, pretty
Sure
busy
will.
week.
Mm, that's awesome. It keep you out of trouble. I know you like
That's
making mischief.
the rumor. I do. I
Yeah.
do enjoy mischief.
Yeah, and I've been trying to get more debates again. Modern day debate is sort of offering me a couple. This one I'm taking is sort of which has more evidence, atheism or Islam, which is sort of a flawed
Hmm.
proposition. But at this point, I think theists need a helping hand. To be honest with you, they kind of so I'm willing to debate with one arm tied behind my back. That's fine. I don't
Hmm.
see a problem. So yeah, look, we'll even win the debates. Just absolutely hamstrung. So hi, Big Bad Mama. Good to see you. Binge thinker out there, yeah. But I'll get D'Souza up. Oh, D'Souza's already up. There he goes. And I
Yeah.
suppose we should, if you don't have anything else, we should start this rolling and get it going.
Sure thing.
And yeah, and Yeah, but I really look forward. I've avoided. I saw a few clips of the presidential debate on Jon Stewart, but I've kind of avoided seeing the entire thing. But I know it is an absolute travesty to humanity in general. So you will have my unfiltered first reaction because I really haven't seen much of it at all. Just a couple of clips, basically, which should be fun. All right, D'Souza, what have you got to say for yourself?
But they're nevertheless described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah. None of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. Now, I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
Well, I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you saying that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not saying
Let me ask you a different question.
I'm saying that historically it matters.
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference between sort of like, so when we talk about whether Jesus existed, it has to be sort of put out there that it matters whether Jesus, the divine figure, existed. Because the Jesus that the figure of Jesus that they portray may not be the one that actually lived.
And yeah, I mean, that seems pretty likely from what we know about the Gospels that we currently have access to today. I mean, well, obviously it's more likely because the non-supernatural idea is always more likely than the supernatural one, but that's a whole other thing. It reminds me of a story from around the turn of the 20th century. The title eludes me, but I think it was called When It Was Dark or something like that. Reference to John, how the discovery of Jesus's body or lack of body in John starts out with when it was still dark. But the story is archaeologists in the Middle East uncover a tomb. It's definitely Jesus's, and there is a body in it. So Jesus never rose. The world knows for sure now Christianity is a lie. And according to the book, which is a fictional story, obviously, everyone simply decides, well, if Christianity's false, then morals don't mean anything, and people go absolutely freaking crazy, and the world is almost destroyed until someone proves that the tomb with the body in it was a hoax somehow. And that book kind of fell out of favor because people didn't like that. They didn't like the idea of not the loss of morality thing. They were fine with that. They didn't like even the hypothetical concept that Jesus might not have really risen from the grave. And we kind of see that reflected in Dinesh's reaction, how Alex is posing a very simple hypothetical, and Dinesh instinctively, reflexively, are you saying that? It's obviously a hypothetical, but Dinesh still reacted to it at a rather extreme degree.
I think I've got a number of problems with the plot that you've just outlined. I guess maybe plot holes is a bit strong a word because internally it's fine, but I think that if they did find Jesus' tomb and they found Jesus, the Christians would deny it. Like, they deny the age of the earth. There's no way they'd accept that. Like, it just would never happen. Aside from morality not breaking down because one religion is proven false.
It's a little Christocentric. I'm like, folks, simmer down. Like, if you count every flavor of Christianity, including Catholicism through Jehovah's Witnesses, like the main Orthodox ones all the way to the wackadoo loons, you still only make up not quite 2 billion people. There's 6 billion other people on Earth who are moraling just fine. Yeah.
And lots of different other religions, and there's Hinduism in India that's been going on for longer than Christian. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, no. Apart from that little thing, Christians would never accept that. I think there would just be a fracture of people that believed it, a fracture of people that didn't, and especially the fundamentalists would just keep on believing it.
Oh yeah, I could absolutely see some of our favorite I could see Donnie from SFT going, well, clearly this is proof of Christianity because, and insert excuse here.
And then the ones that would say, oh, his spiritual form rose and it left his body behind, yada yada. They'd be apologetics. Oh, look, loves Kimberly. I mean, they get angry that they basically said Jesus was Middle Eastern. You know what I mean? Like they showed a picture of what he would likely look like, and that the Christians went mad because he wasn't white skinned and blonde haired. It's ridiculous, like it's yeah.
The idea of him being Asian, though, that's not entirely unfounded. I mean, a lot of the philosophy that he espoused had a lot of Buddhist influence, so it's conceivable that he may have come from the East. And in Japan, the tomb of Jesus Christ. So we actually have found the tomb. It's just not where Christians want it to be.
The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
First of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus's crucifixion? Unknown.
The hill of Golgotha, wasn't it? On the hill of Golgotha?
Calvary,
where was it?
Which was
Calvary?
near Golgotha, yeah.
Disputed. There are a couple of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
No, he's talking about what refutes Christianity is whether the events surrounding his death and supposed resurrection are in fact true, is what would undermine Christianity. If he was a quite enlightened, quite progressive, very intelligent guy who preached some philosophical things that were outlandish for the area and time that he lived and then died, like if that version is true, if that hypothesis is true, Christianity is finished. It has to include being the Son of God, being a in one form or another supernatural, being able to transcend death. And, you could even put some of the characteristics of God with that, being sort of all-powerful, all-knowing, all good, depending on your flavor of Christianity. But if he didn't do anything supernatural, Christianity's done.
Yeah, if we had a time machine and found out Jesus was just an apocalyptic preacher, and that's all, then what do we have? But it goes to show. I don't know if Dinesh is being smooth-brained, if he's got foggy thinking going on, or if he's deliberately trying to red herring Alex off track. But a whole bunch of unknowns are not the same as contradictions, which is what Alex is pointing at. Like, we don't know for sure when he was born, although that's another thing that the Bible has contradictions about, because even though there aren't dates on when things happened, there were rulers identified. Like in one story, King Herod was reigning. In another story, it was a Roman governor, and they lived like 10 years apart. So Jesus was born at two different times that are at least 10 years apart.
Yes.
That doesn't mean the miracles are wrong. It just means the stories are unreliable, possibly about the miracles.
Yeah.
It would not.
No.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have two guys. And they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34.
Yes, but that's trivial to the claims of Christianity. What he's talking about is not trivial to the claims of Christianity. Dinesh is sort of saying, so it's like evidence for a bank robbery, right? Like if you're basically looking to convict some people or whether they're innocent or guilty of robbing this bank, basically, the police is sort of saying, hey, what did you see? And different eyewitnesses have different stories, and they convict somebody and they're saying, oh, well, they didn't know what age they were either. It's kind of, one is trivial to the events, which is how old they are. The other is very, like, whether they were at the place at the time, putting them at the place. That's not trivial to the events. So I think Dinesh is being really dodgy here by sort of going, well, it doesn't matter if things contradict one another. Some things don't matter. Some things do.
Yeah, like the claim isn't, humans get stories wrong, humans miss details. The fact that the most holiest site in this religion, where Jesus rose from the dead, that tomb, the fact that nobody knows where the tomb is, that's a problem for me. But it's not just that. Yeah. This book is claimed to be God-breathed and inerrant, and if it's making basic errors, then it's clearly not true about that claim. What other claims is it not true about?
Yeah. And aside from that, we know for a fact that things were inserted into this book after it was originally penned by the early church fathers. We have last episode of this, I spoke about the long ending of Mark. We know it was added later. We know. But didn't Ron Wyatt find the tomb of Jesus? He found everything else. He found the arks. And,
he claimed to. It was coincidence. Well, I think he found it twice, or maybe I'm mixing up my stories. He found the crucifixion site, which he found the blood of Jesus in the ground under the crucifixion site, which coincidentally happened to be directly above where the Ark of the Covenant that he found was hidden.
Yes.
But as far as the tomb, I believe he determined that was the sepulcher thing, which is now a Christian church in Jerusalem. The problem there is we know when that was built and what it was originally for before it was converted into a church. And it was not the tomb. So, I mean, but Ron Wyatt being right about something would itself be a miracle.
Yes, that would be. I may even convert if Ron Wyatt is correct about anything, really.
4 years old.
Right, but that's a different kind, because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point, I wouldn't say that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false.
No, but I'm saying
firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true. It means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up, and that I could engage in exactly. Let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 is 33.
He's building straw men on top of straw men.
Right. This is one of the worst straw men that I've ever seen. Like, holy crap. He's if you missed the previous episode, he already pointed to where we know that Luke changed something, or whoever wrote Luke changed something in order to service a narrative that they wanted to make. We know this.
Yeah. A lot of these are motivated in order to claim that prophecy was fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And Dinesh just can't wrap his head around the idea of a hypothetical.
Because
they're
from
so
Egypt,
not on the same page.
Yeah. Like, we know that one says they went to Egypt and one says, but they said that they were fulfilling prophecy by writing that. So we know that they wrote it, changed it. Another example is Jesus having been born in Bethlehem, because the prophecy said that the Christ would come from Bethlehem, but he was clearly from Nazareth. So how do they get him to Bethlehem? Well, they invent a census that the Romans never did. There's no record of, and that was a census where you had to return to the place of your birth.
Your ancestor's birth.
Your
Which ancestor?
birth,
whichever one we need to fulfill a prophecy.
Right. Which is so weird, because people were not mobile sort of geographically like they are today. And even if they were, what kind of census would you like? The Romans weren't stupid. They did censuses to know where in their empire resources, basically the same reason we do them today. It's so we know where to put resources. So we take a census of where people are, what their jobs are, and that's exactly what the Romans did. But they had to go back to the place of their ancestors and then return there to where they live afterwards. What kind of crazy world is that? Were the Romans exempt from this census? Obviously, because all of the Romans that lived in this Roman province, because don't forget it was a province of Rome, would have to go back to Rome.
Yep, we're all just gonna leave, guys. Nobody rebel while we're away.
Right.
And then who's gonna count the census? If all the Rome. Yeah.
But they had to get him back to Bethlehem, because that's what the prophecy said. That, everybody knows he came from Nazareth. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So stylish. Look, your hat game is on point. I can't even compete. I don't even try. Hell, I don't even try to compete with hair. That's how good it is. I'm left in the dust. That's
I retroactively made Mark give up on hair.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Okay, and so
in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction, and in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
I'll say it. Come on,
it wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
contradicting each other.
No,
contradicting each other. Yeah. Yeah.
Alex is just sick of Dinesh's shit at this point.
Yeah, and I remember, I forget one of the contradictions. One of them was, I think, but it was like something about the apostles, and they found out in one story it has them found out in a room in an inn, and another it's on a hill. Like, the contradictions are significant, kind of. They're not small contradictions, and the the apologists sort of will say, oh, well, it's just different events from different perspectives, right? There's a problem there because, yeah, some of them you can sort of say, hey, maybe it was, a different perspective. Sure, they didn't get all of the details, but some of them are definitely mutually exclusive. I think one of the ones was how Judas died. And one sort of one of them says he had a death by hanging, and another said that he fell headlong and his entrails gushed out. In a field or something. Hang on a second, let me find it.
Yeah, it was the field of blood thing. What he did with the 30 pieces of silver is he theoretically bought a field, and in the one story he was farming it, and he tripped and fell down and his guts exploded, because that's a thing that happens. In another version, he felt bad, so he killed himself, and the 30 pieces of silver were used to buy the same field, but it was turned into like food for the homeless or some crap. And it's an explanation of why the field is named that, to try to link it to Jesus's story. It doesn't directly make any difference one way or the other as far as the miracle claims, but it goes to show that there's a thread within these stories of people just making shit up to explain other things.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of them is Matthew 27:5. Then he threw down pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. Right, that's in Matthew. In Acts 1:18, it says, now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle and his entrails gushed out. Now, the apologists have this thing where they say, well, it's describing it from two different perspectives. That sort of he hanged himself and then fell down in his gut, and it's like one says that he threw down the 30 pieces of silver and went and hanged himself, and the other says that he went and bought a farm. Maybe that's where the phrase, to buy the farm comes from. Who knows?
Maybe.
And then exploded. Like this is a direct contradiction of what happened, and they try to make it work to, well, if you hang somebody, they'll sometimes split, and no, they don't. That's not what happens.
I do love Matthew, though. It's the best gospel. I mean, it's got the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, which is what Christians are supposed to be doing to be Christian, that very few pay attention to. But it's also got the zombies rising from the grave.
Yes.
It's got exploding Judases. It's the best fucking story.
Isn't Matthew the one with the eclipse as well? Like the eclipse that nobody notices and is completely impossible in there?
Could be.
Because the world had to go dark when Jesus died, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's sort of these kind of things where, apologists really, they just try and find a way to make it work. And to anybody that has a modicum of sense, it doesn't work. Like what Dinesh is doing at the moment, sort of trying to equate whether they went to Egypt or not to fulfill the prophecy with whether he was 34 or 33. That is not comparable. That's like saying, well, was the history of Hannibal of Carthage accurate? We don't care if he was 34 or 33 when he crossed the mountains with elephants. What we want to know is, did he actually cross the Alps with elephants? That's what we want to know.
Yeah. Dinesh is trying to paint it like Alex is getting hung up on minor details. That's why I keep saying trivial. But as Alex points out, they're not trivial. because the authors outright state because of this, which is critical to the story being true.
Yes.
Not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So we fish out this prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a
what are you talking about, scholars? Just because you don't know about this event doesn't mean it. What?
Not Dinesh telling on himself for, not knowing his own theology.
Yeah. Look, Alex knows way more about his holy text and the religion and the history of it than Dinesh would ever hope to. Seriously. This is part of the embarrassment for theists at the moment, and why Christians, they're not debating anymore. They're not even trying to debate anymore, because it's really embarrassing to step into the ring with an atheist and get everything wrong about your own text, because they've been raised on this interpretation of the Bible that, the longer it's gone on, the more unlikely it seems further down the track. It's really, really weird. Wow.
There are contradictions. You wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either. But, okay, you've heard of it.
No, he's not spending it on one. He mentioned there was women at the temple. He mentioned the contradictions about Hosea. He mentioned a lot. Dinesh, what are you doing? The problem is
Alex is actually face-palming.
Right. Well, I don't blame him. The problem also is that if you can point out one contradiction, you've already shown the Bible is not inerrant. You cannot have an inerrant Bible with any contradictions because they're mutually exclusive. You can't do that because one event has got to be errant. Does that make sense?
Yeah. At least one has to be wrong.
Yeah.
Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel.
Right? You don't think that this is a highly discussed?
Oh wow, that's poisoning the well if ever I've seen it. That's horribly poisoning the well. You've been listening to his YouTube channel. What? So he's just making this up from his YouTube channel, Dinesh? What are you saying?
Oh no, not YouTube.
Dinesh D'Souza has a YouTube channel as well, so I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Wow, and one of these people, don't forget, has a degree in theology.
And it's not Dinesh.
Yeah. Wow, Dinesh.
Point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the Gospel.
Dinesh, also, you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. We can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem
brings up every single, he's not bringing up one contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love this. But I think I would have given him a bit more rope, to be honest with you. I mean, Alex is fantastic. He's got his own stuff. I probably would have gone, so there's only one contradiction in the Bible, like this one kind of thing. That's the only one I've mentioned. And let him say yes. But, that's just me. I like it when people...
Well, I mean, in fairness, Alex did bring up a whole bunch, and then Dinesh is trying to say, oh, you've spent all this time on just one supposed... No, it hasn't been just one. Here's several. Take your pick.
Mm-hmm. And it really is... I'm reminded again of what I said last week, where Alex is talking to Dinesh. Dinesh is talking to the audience. He does not... Like, he is just, he's over here saying this at the audience, and Alex is like talking to him directly. It's almost like he doesn't want to look at Alex in case he, makes eye contacts and freezes in terror. Like, I don't know. He looks very strange. Very strange. Maybe it's just my
That's fair. I've noticed that with a lot of apologists. Like when Alex was really young and still building his reputation, he did a conversation with Frank Turek at some Christian radio station. And whenever Alex was talking, he was looking right at Frank. But whenever Frank was talking, he was looking at the radio host. And that just, it speaks worlds to me.
The problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial. And then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, oh, well, I haven't even heard of it and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is, when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction. I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead, it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
Do they contradict each other?
And it is quite possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark, more different than Mark, contradict Mark. Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting, look it this way. You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here today to go and write an account of this debate, right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person. I was their accounts with a lot of detail. And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
But
These are not. And then someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought this was a way of maximizing his.
Yeah, but nobody's saying, like, if both those people wrote down a book and we compiled them, no one would say that it is inerrant. Right, that every word of that is absolutely the truth. That's the problem. We've got this account that Christians are saying it is 100% historically correct. That's exactly what happened, and it is inerrant. There can't be an error in it. Yet there's contradictions.
Yeah, nobody is saying that Dinesh's position on the stage is the proof of the truth of a miracle claim that demonstrates there is a God, which God it is, and how you should live your life.
Right.
Nobody cares that much about Dinesh's body position. But what Dinesh is claiming has very high stakes, if true.
Yeah, and the thing is, if somebody said that Dinesh was over towards, facing the stage, he was well, okay, let's just take stage terminology, which is, I think stage terminology is looking out over the audience. Like, just say he's in stage left, right? Another one guy says he was in stage right. Okay, they're clearly defined areas that do not overlap, and they're center stage in the middle kind of thing, right? So if that was a text, we would say, oh, one of them was wrong. We wouldn't say both of them are right. That's the problem, because they're looking at 2 things that contradict and saying, well, both of them are right.
Yeah.
His rhetorical effectiveness in the audience, people would be like...
Now imagine somebody said, Alex was wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket, someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced, and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact, he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his own country.
Okay, perfect.
He would say that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the color of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
That could well be true, but what I'm getting at is we know, just from normal experience, that if the 2 of us are sitting in a cafe and...
But the Christians will go, no, they were both right.
Which Christians being wrong doesn't necessarily mean the Bible is wrong. But
it doesn't necessarily mean Jesus wasn't God, or he didn't resurrect, or whatever. Yeah,
right.
Sorry,
Like
Henry, go
Alex
for it,
said,
yeah.
it's perfectly consistent that the Bible could be completely wrong about everything, and Jesus could still be the Son of God. As Frank Turek likes to point out frequently, the first couple centuries of Christians didn't have the Bible. That wasn't a thing until the canonical councils. There were stories running around. Everybody had different stories. The stories
Yeah.
available at the time contradicted each other a lot more. But even those stories took a few decades before they really started to show up. The earliest Christians had nothing but word of mouth to go by. So the Bible, you could throw the Bible out and still have
Yep.
Christianity.
Yes. And a lot of it was based upon these oral traditions kind of thing. It you know. Mhm. And don't forget that they went through the Bible and threw out things that were contradictory, or basically um, you know, too absurd to be put in there, like the infancy gospel and the Gospel of Thomas and things like that. They went through and they made a so they edited it into a coherent book, and they still got it wrong. They still have contradictions in there because and it's fine. It's totally fine to have a historical book that has apparent contradictions in it. It's fine, right? That's perfectly fine until you start saying that book is inerrant. And the one that always drives me crazy is that it's the most reliable book in history. That is clearly not true.
Yeah,
We see an accident.
the people at the canonical councils, their whole thing was they were looking at a huge array of fan fiction and deciding which things were going to be incorporated in the extended universe canon. Kind of literally what they were doing. They saw contradictions. They knew there were contradictions. But from their point of view, they were creating the collection of all the stories about Jesus. Whether they were true or not, they believed in them personally, but it was more professionalism in the enterprise back in those days. And they were saying, look, we're going to include these ones that do have these contradictions, and we're not going to edit them because we have fucking integrity. We're going to say this is what the story is, and there's details that are problematic. There's possibly big claims that are problematic, but that's on you, the reader, because people, had critical thinking and discernment at the time, to determine for yourselves what those mean. And then the next set of councils came up and they started making changes, but that's a whole other story. The point is, none of them were asserting any of these were literally true at the time. If that were the case, I'd imagine they probably would have included some of the other gospel. Like, one thing that's been coming up since like the 4th century is, where's the gospel of Jesus? We know he was literate from what's in the gospels we have.
Yes.
Where's his testimony?
Hold it. Let me get my tinfoil hat. They're in the basement of the Vatican, being locked away so that people can't read the message that Jesus didn't want a church built in his name to collect tithes from everybody.
Maybe so. That would make a lot of sense.
Oh yeah. No, he specifically said, don't create a church in my name and collect money in my name. Vatican wouldn't like that.
Of differences are normal. So let's just say, for example, here's God showing us a revelation, and the revelation can be whatever it is, and you and I write an account of it, and somebody finds that my account of it not only is different than yours, but let's just say, for example, I go, oh, Jesus was wearing a cloak. Another guy goes, he's wearing a robe. For anyone to actually think that this is, in fact, a refutation of the truth of the Bible is ludicrous. So anyway, in our format, we've agreed.
Yeah, but the problem is you're not listening to Alex. He's saying that if we know that one person was saying he was wearing a cloak because he supported Rome and he wanted to promote them, kind of thing, and promote the ideals of Rome. Well, yeah. And another said, "Oh, he's using a robe to promote the Israelite cause," kind of thing. Then we have a problem with one of those accounts, and it does matter because you're talking about the intentionality behind a very significant figure, and it gets even more significant when you're talking about whether they actually are going to judge you after you're dead. Like, it becomes much more significant. So if he is going to Egypt so they can fulfill a prophecy, then that is incredibly significant, because it goes into whether that figure was the basis of that prophecy, and whether that figure is actually, like, you know, whether there's a contradiction in who found the empty tomb is important, because we're saying, how reliable is this story? How much weight can we put on this story? Is it just a story? As Bart Ehrman pointed out, somebody like Jesus would never get a tomb. Tombs were reserved for very important figures, and all throughout the Bible, he's painted as just a rebel who's very poor and not even that significant. He would get a pauper's grave at best.
I suspect even that is a little bit of posery. Like, we know that his ministry did raise a rather lot of money, which is why he had to have a purse bearer, which was Judas, which is why Judas betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's killing the goose that keeps laying the golden egg. But that's a whole other side topic. The main point is that Dinesh is just not getting that it isn't about whether Jesus had a cloak or not. It's about whether the prophecy Jesus would wear a cloak is true or not.
Yeah. And you know, don't forget that, as you pointed out earlier, Amber, and rightly so, we're all being told you should wear cloaks based upon this information. Right? We're all told what you ought to do based upon this information.
Do a flip where you've been asking me questions now.
Oh,
Let me ask you something.
If you've got something to ask.
Let me turn around and ask you questions in a sort of what I think is a more fundamental mode, because it gets to what the Bible really is.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah, let's hear it, Dinesh. He seems uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Maybe that's just me, but yeah.
Do you think that the universe had a beginning?
What the?
When you're backed into a corner.
Is the Bible true? Okay, so for those watching that just are going, well, why is he so outraged? The debate topic is what is the Bible true? Do you think the universe had a beginning? What?
Oh, well, he actually is going to make an attempt to make it seem relevant.
Oh, I got to hear this.
Don't know.
You don't know.
I would suspect yes.
You suspect yes?
Yeah, sure.
How did the writers of the book of Genesis know that?
I have no idea. If I'm going to be cynical about this, if they did guess, it would be a 50-50 guess. And I also think that if we had scientific...
Would it be a 50-50 guess?
Yeah, because, and it might even be worse than that for you, because if we had some kind of scientific popular hypothesis, because of course the Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, who knows, right? But like whatever the popular scientific hypothesis is, if it were pointing to an infinite universe, for example, as Einstein thought we lived in, then I'm sure that people would open Genesis. They would say that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and say that the earth just means the earth itself, right? Like I think it would be equally easily interpretable on either account.
All right.
So Alex raises he touches on a good point, but doesn't expound on it because he wants to toss the ball back to Dinesh. But Dinesh is trying to say, well, we know the universe began to exist at some point, and the Bible says God created the heaven and the earth. How would the ancients know that the universe was created and therefore there must be a creator and therefore God, yada, 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 whatever? He's trying to make that false equivalency between the Big Bang and let there be light. I wish Alex had nailed him with it, but they have other
Yeah.
shit to talk about. I understand. It says God created the heavens and the earth
Yes.
at the same time. And we know that's not true. So the very
Yes.
first sentence in the Bible is factually wrong. The earth, for reference,
Yeah.
is something like 10 billion years younger than the whole rest of the universe.
Yeah, there's apologetics around it. They say, hey, it wasn't at the same time. One was after the other. You know, there's various apologetics to excuse it. But a plain reading of the text says, yes, that is wrong. Yes. You have to do some mental backflips in order to make that work. You know, like, so in the beginning could have been, well, would have to be billions of years, right? Like in the beginning could be, you know, what the universe is 14 point something and the earth is 4 points, so 10 billion years kind of thing is in the beginning. And you know, heavens and that, and is this is the apologetics. The heavens 10 plus billion years go by, and the earth, right?
And it's bad apologetics too. It's so bad because,
well, it's better than they created them with age. I mean, come on, Ember. There's worse apologetics out there.
I don't know if it is, because heavens in the context of the biblical cosmology, it doesn't just mean the sky. It doesn't just mean space and the stars. It means that alternate plane of existence parallel to our reality where God hangs out with the angels. Like, it's a separate reality.
I don't
not
think
just...
that was necessary. Well, I don't think that was necessarily the case back then. I think they thought God was in the sky.
I don't know.
You know, because the same word is used when people reach out to the heavens kind of thing. Like the
but
same
they're speaking
word
poetically when they do that.
Yeah.
Like we'd have to dig through a whole lot of historians' work and you know, contact Kip Davis and Dr. Josh and so forth to really get a handle on this. But I really think the idea of heaven being synonymous with the sky and the stars and whatnot is a relatively new convention, because people lost the ability to think poetically. They tend to take things more literally. Whereas the Bible is very poetic about a lot of things.
Yeah,
you know, tangents.
Yeah, tangents. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'd love to speak to somebody about whether, you know, the ancient Israelites did, or the Canaanites, I guess, believed that the heavens were the sky and the place where God dwelt. Because as far as I know, I thought that sort of Yahweh was a storm god primarily. And so I think that the ancient Canaanites literally thought he was in the sky, much like sort of Zeus was on Mount Olympus kind of thing. You know, it was sort of a place that they dwelt, was in the sky and clouds.
That's another factor too, is cultural contamination. Like as I think Carlin pointed out, every one of these patriarchal religions is a big white bearded dude living on a cloud sitting on a throne. You know, it's our different ideas of what makes a god the god, you know, the one that everyone, my god looks prettier than your god, that sort of thing. They all kind of got mixed together, and then through Dawkins's memes, natural selection eventually got made into what we perceive today.
And Phantom X is true. They thought the Power of Babel would go to heaven. Yes, they did. Which is, you know, weird for a different dimension. But you could be right. I don't know that.
I mean, well, it is a fair point. On the flip side, even the concept of a different dimension is using modern language. Like the ancients,
right, exactly.
They didn't know what the fuck we meant by an alternate reality kind of thing.
Yeah.
My professors at Dartmouth was Robert Jastrow. He headed the Mount Wilson Laboratory, one of the great astronomers of the 20th century. Sure. So Jastrow writes in his book, God and the Astronomers, that for 250 years, modern science has been attempting to discover whether the universe had a beginning. And you can think of these scientists as ascending a very tall mountain in which there are many pathways. And for many years, with the steady state hypothesis and so on, there were beliefs that the universe was eternal. It never had a beginning. In fact, that was the prevailing point of view. And then Jastrow argues it's almost as if we reached the top of the mountain and there was a bunch of Hebrew prophets or theologians sitting there who had been there from the beginning. So
what?
Okay, so that's a thing. Robert Jastrow was a tremendous astronomer. He not only had Hubble's job at Mount Wilson, but he worked with NASA to basically make spaceflight possible. He's the first human buried on the moon. He got a special send-off. They sent a rocket just to bury him. Fucking amazing person. He's... I don't think Jastrow wrote that. He's referencing a really old parable that Jastrow may have mentioned, but I think he's conflating it with Jastrow's famous passage about scaling the mountain of ignorance. But
I've heard of scaling Mount Ignorance, yeah.
Yeah, but he's talking about like an ancient, well, not ancient, but relatively old parable about how humans with their hubris, they think they can figure things out, and there's many paths up the mountain and yada yada. And when they get up there, the scientists have figured out how to climb the mountain. They get up there and they discover all these mystics who've been there the whole time. The idea being that, you know, the religiously enlightened have the answers and science is only starting to catch up now. It's a very biased story.
I get that, and I sort of hear that all the time kind of thing, but really that what I hear it in reference to is things like you know, Zen Buddhism and sort of meditation, you know, beside of you know, psychologists nowadays find that it's really good for you. And I think that it's sort of will you know, I think that people ages ago, they did discover things. Like, I'm not saying that just because knowledge comes from ancient ago, it's all incorrect, but he's sort of going off on a wild tangent here, saying that the Bible represents the scientific, like as you say, like he got the first line of the Bible gets it wrong. You know, I don't think that going for, well, you know, now scientists agree with the Bible. You know, it reeks of that young Earth creationist saying that, oh, geologists don't believe in the you know, the model they have anymore, kind of thing. You know, and nobody believes in evolution. It kind of reeks of that. Like, oh, now physicists are agreeing with the Bible. No, they're really not, Dinesh. They're really not. Especially the part where the Earth is created before the sun. They're not agreeing with that, mate.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, not just the Earth, but also plants are created before the sun. Right? If you want to get down to, well, does the science accurately, like, this is what's the debate we have all the time? Is the Bible scientific? Oh, hell no.
Yeah, and they could easily say that, like this paraphrase of Robert Jastrow that he mentions. He's going in that direction. He's saying the facts of the thing don't really matter because on a metaphorical level, it seems to be kind of true-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has this truthiness to it. Wasn't that the Colbertic truthiness?
Oh, yeah. Colbert's
something
best
that
creation.
sounds true. Sounds true, yeah.
I'm describing now a skeptic, a true skeptic, and a true scientist describing the scientific shock that attends to a discovery that, and I think it is out of the spirit of that discovery for you to go, oh yeah, I mean, it could have been this. It's like tossing a coin. It isn't like tossing a coin. This is a question that's been argued for 2 centuries and only resolved in the last several decades. And resolved
the origin of the universe has not been resolved, Dinesh. That is not true. Like the origin of the, like, don't forget, he thinks the Big Bang is the origin because he knows about as much as science he does about the Bible. It's not the origin. We're explaining the rapid expansion, why the universe is expanding, not the origin. The Big Bang doesn't explain the origin. It explains the early formation of the universe, not the origin. But it's quite possible that God did the Big Bang in the first place. That's, God was the Big Banger, if you will. Possible. I don't think so, but there's nothing logically impossible about it. But it has, the origin has not been settled.
Okay. Also, correction. Sydney pointed out I am in error. It's actually Shoemaker from Shoemaker-Levy comet. Several comets, in fact. I think it was Shoemaker-Levy 9, I think, was the one that we observed colliding with Jupiter. Not Robert Jastrow, who's buried on the moon. So that's my bad.
Okay. Well, I don't know of either of them. You know a lot more about cosmology and space than I do. I apologize.
Decisively in one side and the other, and the fact that you're not willing to just straight out say, yeah, it is actually an astounding fact that we now know.
No. I mean, look, the scientific method has also revealed to us that the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That is much later than the sun. The Old Testament account, the Hebrew Bible account, tells us that it was the other way around.
Yep.
So got that bit wrong.
All right.
Loading screen.
So we're,
yeah. And this is just semantic. This is just smoke and mirrors by Dinesh, to get off the inerrancy of the Bible. He's sort of saying, hey, but this one scientist said, which he may not have. We'd have to look it up, right? Who was he saying said it?
Who said what?
I can't remember. Who said that we're catching up with ancient Jewish mystics, basically?
Oh, Jastrow. He was misquoting Jastrow, but generally, yeah. Apparently, Jastrow wrote quite a lot about trying to fuse religion and science together, and he tended to favor a Christian paradigm, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like, and even if one scientist did say it, it doesn't mean he's trying to say that, hey, the Bible got exactly the origin of the universe right, and that's just not true. And he points out the example. He's just using smoke and mirrors because he wants to get away from this problems with contradictions in the Bible. So now, like, this is the thing. So here's the thing. He gets forced into this corner where he has to admit there's internal contradictions, right? Just internal ones, if you just take the thing out. So his way of distracting from the internal contradictions is to go and say, hey, it is parallel. It's basically in synchronicity with science. You're better off with the internal review than comparing the Bible with science. I'm going to love how he explains why it says that the Earth was created before the sun in the Bible. I'm going to love this. This is going to be hilarious.
Yes, the Bible is not.
So sometimes it gets things right. Sometimes it gets things wrong.
The Bible is not a science. It's not listing out a scientific.
Well, now hold on a second. You can't now move the goalpost, especially if you're still going to miss.
The issue. Well, no.
Yeah.
Pick up those goalposts. Oh, Dinesh, they must be pretty heavy.
Absolutely. I've not seen so much moving of the goalposts since the FIFA World Cup last year. Like, seriously, the goalposts are being hauled around, and it's kind of like a Texas sharpshooter fallacy. You're kind of only registering the hits here, saying, "Oh," but I'm still wondering how, like,
Yeah, it's wild. Dinesh mentions earlier that the idea that the universe had a beginning ran counter to what most scientists at the time thought. What he's leaving out of that statement is that most scientists at the time were Christian, and they refused to believe the universe could have a beginning because they were Christian, because they thought there is no way a perfect God could create a universe that was anything other than eternal. How could it not be eternal? Except at the moment when, God comes down to end it. But even that end isn't really an end because he creates a new earth and a new Jerusalem and yada yada.
Yeah, new kingdom.
So it's eternal from their perspective. That's why they were biased in that direction. As soon as there was undeniable evidence, and oh my goodness, they tried like hell to deny it. But as soon as the evidence was undeniable, they shifted it and said, oh, well, it just confirms Genesis, despite the fact that the priest who made the mathematical conclusion that showed there was something that we call the Big Bang, the moment of inflation, if you prefer, whatever. When he presented his findings to the Pope said, Genesis is confirmed. And he told the Pope, no, this is not that.
Well, the issue of the origin of the universe is extremely critical.
You just told me that Genesis predicted or knew about or somehow knew about the scientific hypothesis of the origin of the universe. Then when I pointed out another scientific observation that doesn't accord with Genesis, you tell me that Genesis isn't a scientific text to begin with.
Well, if you read Genesis, it is making a astounding claim, which pertains to God. Obviously, God created the heavens and the earth.
Is it making a scientific claim or not? Is it telling us how the universe scientifically formed or not?
It's not telling us how the universe scientifically formed, because if it did, they would be outlining the history of the Big Bang.
Then what's the relevance of bringing this up in the first place?
Because it is stating a conclusion, not a process. It's not telling you how the universe was formed. It's not telling you about...
It also doesn't tell us how the sun was formed, but it tells us that it was formed after the
Earth.
Earth.
We want to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Trapped in his own dichotomy, and he wants both options.
And let's face it, it is not like there is nothing in there that would align with like scientific understanding of the formation of the Earth or anything like it. There's nothing in there that would do that. You would have to take a very liberal interpretation with a lot of metaphor and hyperbole to even get to that spot. But when there is a clear contradiction, I love that Alex pointed this out, with what we definitely know about the formation of the Earth, you say, well, it's about the end goal, not the process. That is clear confirmation bias. Like, that is clearly just taking the what you want the conclusion to be in the Bible. That is absolutely clear.
Tells us that that's the case. That's wrong. It's incorrect.
Show me.
I don't have a Bible.
Okay. Well, I've read that passage maybe a dozen times. I have never spotted this contradiction that you're describing, but I'll go back and look at it again. But
what?
Dinesh telling on himself again.
What?
It's the second time he's asked for a Bible, which, again, they have a giant book there, but no Bible, even though they're talking about the Bible. But whatever. I've read that passage a dozen times, and I've never spotted that. Okay, so you're not paying attention, or are you just smooth-brained?
There's like 7 days in creation. That's why we have the 7-day week, according to the Bible. Now, on the 7th day, he rested, obviously. I think it was on the 4th day he created I'm struggling to remember. I think it was the 4th day he created the earth and plants. And on the 6th day, the 5th day, sorry, he created the sun.
Well, we get different orders of creation and different
No,
books.
it was 3rd and 4th. Dry land and plants were created on the 3rd day. On the 4th day, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. It was 3rd and 4th. So I'm slightly incorrect.
Yeah, either way, the plants precede the sun. And how do you even have days before there's a sun? Like, how do you know what's the first day and the second day? I mean, the sky is on day 2. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. Yeah. And on the first day, it was light in the darkness without a sun. Okay. Weird, but okay. Maybe it's from other stars. Who knows?
Maybe.
But plants were created on the third day. Yeah, dry land and plants on the third day. But here's the thing. That is Genesis 1:16. That's 16 paragraphs into the fucking book, Dinesh. You haven't even read the start of it. Like, I don't expect everybody to make it through the Bible, quite frankly. But if you're going to go and take a debate, is the Bible true? You would expect to have read at least the first chapter.
Yeah, and you got to give Alex credit. He could have opened the debate with Genesis. Dinesh brought that up. Alex was much more focused on the Gospels, talking about Christianity specifically. He could have just opened with, here's Genesis. Is this true? Factually, no. It's not even remotely close. Although it would be really interesting if we found evidence recently that many of the asteroids in our solar system are the remnants of planets from a previous solar system.
Yes.
Which creates the slim possibility, but still a possibility, that the rocky planets in our solar system are just amalgamations of other leftover planetoids from that previous solar system, which from that point of view means the Earth could, from a certain point of view, actually be older than the sun. And that would be kind of neat.
Well, it depends what you're calling the Earth at that point, because yeah.
But again,
on what day is it that God makes the sun? And day 4, I think it's day 3 or day 4, something around there.
You're right, but the mainstream of the Christian tradition does. It obviously can't be day.
When's light created? Day 1. When's plants created? Day 3. Yeah.
4 because the concept of day in the original Hebrew doesn't mean day.
Sure, but day 4 comes after day 1, right?
Well, it's describing obviously epochs or periods.
Yeah,
yes.
so actually it's much worse because now the sun is created much later than the Earth was,
and much later than plants were. How did the plants survive if that's the case, Dinesh? So he's right, and he's not letting Dinesh get away with it. It's sort of, Dinesh is like, well, we don't know the time frame. Yeah, but one is after the other. It doesn't matter what the time frame is. Absolutely right. Alex is a beautiful man for pointing this out. Doesn't matter. The order is wrong. If the order is wrong, it doesn't matter how much time is in between the events. The order is wrong. That's it.
Well, not necessarily. Well, show me.
I don't. I mean, we can read through it. We can find Genesis.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if that would be the best.
Does neither of them have a phone on them? Like, come on, guys. Is the Bible true? Don't bother to have a Bible. Like, wow. Okay.
Wouldn't it be a fun plot twist if that giant book on the bottom of the table actually was a Bible? Because we can't tell from viewing what it is. Right. What if Pangburn thought ahead, said they're going to need a Bible, and put a big old freaking Bible there, and neither of them knows it because it's on the second level down of that little table, and they just haven't looked.
Divine hiddenness.
It's about time. I mean, we can do it if you really want to, but what I'm trying to say is that, like, it's not
Let's
astonishing.
move on.
Why not? It's not astonishing.
You brought this up. This was your point, Dinesh. It's been like 2 minutes, and you're like, let's move on. That obviously didn't work.
Yeah,
That's
I'm losing this one too. We need another deflection.
Let's move on. Like, it didn't happen. Smoke bomb. Pocket sand. Dinesh, what are you doing?
To me that like if you're making claims about the origin of the universe, especially in the case where if it was
so this is where Dinesh this sort of highlights the problems with non-preparation for a start. That's number one, and throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. So I've seen this in a lot of debates, kind of thing, and especially where their opponents well prepared. Flat Earth debates, especially. they throw something and see if it sticks. And if the opponent is prepared and they've got really good, solid, reasoned arguments, it looks really bad for the person that throws it. I think that your arguments have to be well considered. Throwing out arguments just because they're arguments and, they worked on, Clubhouse or Discord at some point, that isn't really good enough for debate. You've got to have like reasoned arguments and kind of back them up. Dinesh is just throwing stuff at the moment.
He's desperate.
Yeah. Because that, like, going to, well, the Bible described the origin of the earth is, I don't know what he was thinking. That's something, you're right. That's, you said it earlier. He brought this up. No, Alex could have brought that up as a point in his favor. I don't know why Dinesh went here. Because he's just,
it was a really, it shows he's desperate because it was a really dumb move. I mean, every mythology has a creation story. Maybe it doesn't go all the way back to the beginning of the universe, but every single mythology has, where did the earth come from? The definitions change. Like, what do we mean by the earth? Do we mean the land we're living on specifically? Do we mean the whole planet? Because a lot of ancient cultures had no idea how big this planet really is. But they all have an origin story. Well, we know at some point about 4.62 billion years ago, the Earth began to... And where's the dividing line for that? Like, it was an accretion process. At what point was it not yet the Earth, and at what point was it now the Earth? But that's a whole other thing. They all describe that. By Dinesh's reckoning, that means they're all true, because how could the ancients have known that?
If it is making a specific claim in the knowledge that there's a sort of infinite hypothesis and a beginning hypothesis, to take a 50-50 stab, it's not amazing to me. It would be more amazing to me if everything lined up and it gave us an otherwise unknowable historical scientific account of the beginning of the universe. But as you say, that's not even what Genesis is trying to do. So I don't. In other words, I don't understand how.
I'm not saying that Genesis is trying to unfurl a. I'm saying that Genesis is making a statement about creation, and the statement about creation has a very startling scientific implication. Because if there was a creation, then there obviously wasn't something, and then there was something.
But, I mean, it's not just science which can tell us that the universe had a beginning. I mean, like, there are lots of philosophical arguments that people have made, perhaps most famously Al-Ghazali, who argues against for the impossibility of a past infinite universe. And I think that's so quite convincingly, with no reference to redshifting and no reference to scientific hypotheses. So it's perfectly possible for somebody to take a pretty studious and educated guess at the fact that the universe had a beginning long before the scientific method told us that was the case.
I'm not saying that it's not possible to make philosophical arguments. And of course, as you know, there was a tradition in ancient Greece of making philosophical arguments all over the place.
Maybe,
and other people took it as, eternal kind of thing. Like, this is a non-starter for Dinesh. I don't know where he's going with this. I have no idea.
He's playing checkers and Alex is playing chess. He's trying to, like, take any token at all, and try to get to the back of the board to get a king me. And Alex has like an array of pawns and knights and bishops ready to knock Dinesh down, and like Dinesh has no idea that they're actually playing chess. He's getting outmaneuvered so badly.
Yeah,
that's why.
Let me keep going. It's my time. Let me post.
It's my time. What are you talking about? Nobody's timing you in sort of rebuttals here. What are you talking? It's my time. Says who? Alex is giving you every opportunity to speak. He's just not letting you railroad him, because I noticed that Dinesh is just trying to fill the air with noise. He's just talking constantly. Alex has been pretty well behaved, quite frankly. And I mean, Dinesh is fine, but what makes you think this is your time? I don't understand this. What is that?
Trying to answer your question. Maybe if you ask me how would they know, isn't this astounding? I would say, well, maybe they just had a philosophical tradition that told the beginning of the universe, and that's where they got it from.
Except that
it's not inconceivable.
It's not inconceivable, but it's not likely, because When we think of the tradition of Western civilization, we speak of Athens and Jerusalem. We speak of the origins of philosophy starting in about the 8th century BCE, and then really developing first in Greece. And then we talk about the tradition of revelation developing in ancient Jerusalem. So was there a hidden philosophical tradition? Possible, but probably unlikely. Let's proceed to the let's proceed to the issue of
interesting
the
idea
veracity of
that I've heard from a few different people, that the Western tradition of reason started in Athens, and the Western tradition of religious philosophy started in Jerusalem. But of course, that's not even remotely true. If Athens was so rational, and there was a lot of good philosophy going on in Athens over several centuries, it must be said. But if they were so correct about everything, then why don't we follow the Greek pantheon? You know? Right. And as far as the religious philosophy coming from, no, Jerusalem didn't even exist when the Israelites conquered Canaan.
Yeah.
They built that city. Religious philosophy, moral philosophy, whatever you want to perceive it as, it didn't start with the Hebrews right before Jesus was born. The Hebrews had it the whole time, and other cultures had it. If you want to draw your tradition back to just Jesus, then yes, Jerusalem is the central point. But it isn't just Jesus. The Indus Valley had philosophers and had their own religions. The Chinese various provinces, there's 3 major rivers. Each of them had their own religious traditions and philosophical schools. And the same is true all over the rest of the world. There was philosophy in ancient Egypt during the period when, before the Exodus didn't happen, right? Imhotep, of fame from the movie about the mummy, with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. 2 of the very few famous people I actually know. Imhotep, the real Imhotep, lived during the time of the Ramseses and their dynasty. And he basically invented medicine, which, the Greeks learned about because they wanted to learn everything, especially around the Mediterranean area, and took to a whole other level. But Imhotep got it started. He was like, no, we don't have to let people just suffer. We can try to fix what's wrong with them. Let's figure out what works and what doesn't. He came up with like a variant of the scientific method to apply to medicine. So no, it wasn't just Jerusalem.
Of some of the historical events described in the Bible. Would you say that figures like Jeremiah, David, are these historical figures or mythological figures?
I don't know for certain, but I would say that the Bible is certainly attempting to paint them as historical figures.
Forget what it's attempting to do. You've been trying to.
So I don't know. But
you don't know. You have no idea.
To say yes.
Okay. So on a.
I would predict yes. I would say yes.
You would say
that's
yes.
What I would imagine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. Like, regardless of what the Bible says about these figures, they could. It's just like Jesus. They could be real people. That's fine. No one's sort of pushing back against their existence. We're pushing back against their supernatural qualities, kind of thing.
Yeah. According to Celtic mythology, Bran, who was once High King and after his death went through the apotheosis process to become a god, his skull is buried under where the Tower of London now stands. And as long as it remains undisturbed, the entire British Isle will be protected by the spirit of the great god Bran, which is why Britain has been invaded several times by the Franks and the Anglos and William the Conqueror and so forth. But there's that mythology, and people have a little superstition about it. Not many, because Christianity is mostly taken over in the UK. It's diminishing now, but it's been around long enough to wipe out pretty much all of the preceding cultures.
Yeah.
But say we dig under the Tower of London and find a skull. Does that make it true? Despite all the invasions that prove to the contrary?
Not to mention the Tower of London is a prisoner tower, isn't it? Like it was used to store
It has
prisoners.
been, yeah.
Has been, yeah. So it's not like finding a skull underneath the Tower of London would not be an unusual occurrence, kind of thing.
We have found bones. There was a discovery a few years ago of two. I forget the legend exactly because I don't give a fuck about the UK royals, but there were these two princes that disappeared during a certain king's regency.
The twins.
They were supposed to inherit, and then the regent, after they disappeared, he became the king. Well, we found their skeletons, maybe a dozen years ago-ish.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh.
That was the twins in the tower. That was Richard III.
You know more about it than I do.
Yeah, it's quite possible because he was a regent for a few years before the twins were allegedly killed. And sort of the person that came in and took out Richard III and deposed him was Henry Tudor, who basically said that Richard III killed them. But historians now think that perhaps Henry Tudor came in, deposed Richard III, and then killed the twins as they were the rightful heirs to the throne.
Yeah, could be. Which goes to show that even when a story turns out to be true, ? It can still be factually wrong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Sodom and Gomorrah are historical cities?
Probably, yeah.
Probably, yes. Would you say that Pontius Pilate was a real person?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we have lots of evidence that Pontius Pilate existed.
And New York City exists even today. Therefore, Spider-Man is real?
Yeah.
Okay.
We know that the city of Troy existed. Does that mean that Poseidon threw waves against the walls to damage them?
Yeah. On the other hand, we do know that some things in the stories are false, like Jericho. We know Jericho was a real city, but we also know that it didn't have walls for the trumpet to knock down.
Yeah.
Would you say that, all right, now, these statements that you're saying now were in no way known to be true until recent decades.
Some of those, I'm not sure.
All the ones I mentioned.
If you're talking about like archaeology,
I'm talking biblical archaeology. Let me give you an example.
Sodom and Gomorrah has not been found. Oh no! Sodom and Gomorrah have not been found. I know that the creationists keep saying they have, but they haven't.
That's Ron Wyatt nonsense. Like you can't claim shit. Oh, we've only proven it recently when we haven't, because that makes you just as wrong as the Bible, my guy. What the hell?
There's a number of hypotheses of which cities might have been Sodom and Gomorrah, like cities that we knew existed, and say, hey, that was probably Sodom and that was Gomorrah, whatever. But they haven't been found. And, they have this thing of, oh, sulfur was found at Sodom and Gomorrah. No, they just found sulfur and said, well, that was where it was. No.
Yeah, not even a little bit. And on other details, he's way off too. Like Pilate, there was never any doubt that he existed because he was a Roman official. Like this dude had enough power that he was able to have coins minted with his face on them.
Yeah.
He has been real this whole time, I think we broke it.
Archaeology can't prove the historical existence of
a
person very easily.
Well, let me go into this a little bit here.
And also, I want to make sure we're using the time wisely here. You could give me a sound archaeological bit of evidence that all of these people existed that is in no way tells us about the truth of the stories that are attributed to them.
No.
Well, it seems like he is now it seems like he is now going for third place or sort of trying to win the debate by default kind of thing, by saying, hey, if all of these things are true, that Sodom and Gomorrah existed and all of these little things are true, then doesn't that make the Bible pretty true? But the context here the context here is that when we say, is the Bible true, we're really talking about the supernatural claims. I mean, really, when we get down to it, that's the bone of contention. Because if you're saying, well, is the Bible true? True about what? It's sort of the context is the Bible inerrant? Is it all true? So, things that we don't really care about, things that are just sort of
incidental.
Yeah, incidental, things that are insignificant. We don't really care. But things that are incidental, that have a lot of weight, those are the things that we care about. So we're not expecting you to prove that there were 500 people kind of thing. Absolutely without a shadow of a doubt that 500 people, kind of thing. But we want to know how you can prove that the actual events that are under contention, because it doesn't matter if those 500 people lived or not. We want to know whether they did in fact witness the things that the Bible claims. How do you do that? I don't know. That's your problem. That's not mine.
Mark, there was this dude who used to live here in the United States named George Washington. And we know he lived because, we know where his bones are. That's a thing. When a person is really important to your society, you know where his bones are. But they tell stories about him, like chopping down a cherry tree when his parents found out. He admitted to it because, according to Washington Irving, the fiction author's account of events, I cannot tell a lie. Because Washington actually lived, and his face is on money too, so we know that he definitely lived. Does that make the story about him from the known fiction author also true? Did
Abraham Lincoln, in fact, fight vampires?
I like to think that if he found a vampire, he definitely would have fought them. He was something of a boxer. And
that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a very, very tall man. He was incredibly tall. Long reach. I'd hate to face that in the ring. A very, very long reach. Seems like a bit of a thing. No, he slayed them. Thanks, Beaver. Thanks.
It does. Well, let me put it this way. For many centuries, this is a whole tradition of biblical scholarship in the 19th century. In fact, really until in some cases 10, 15, or 20 years ago, there was absolutely no evidence historically for the existence, for example, of a Hezekiah, Jeremiah, David, let alone actual locations for David's palace.
Sure.
Hezekiah's tomb. All right. Hezekiah's
his tunnels.
Tunnels. Now, let me tell you something I discovered. I was getting a tour recently, a few months ago, in Israel from the guys at Hebrew University, and they were talking about an archaeologist named Elliot Mazar, who's what she calls herself a biblical archaeologist. She's not a Christian or even a believer.
What's the thing? Like they didn't know that they existed, and then they found that they existed. That isn't how we So I think he's trying to say, hey, so why don't we believe the other stuff that we don't know about? The time for believing that thing is when we find evidence of it, not beforehand, right? Not you only go, well, then we believe that thing once we find the evidence of it. We don't say, well, because we found evidence of all these things we didn't know exist, we just believe everything offhand. I don't understand that logic. Is that what he's trying to say? Maybe I should just let him speak. He's very, for all that he's absolutely falling down, I can see why he's kind of got this reputation as a good debater. He kind of, you can see that he's picked a point that he's after, and he will circle it in a very, very sort of dodgy way. Like he'll leave enough room for him to sort of throw pocket sand and run. He's very, very slippery, very slimy individual as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't just make his point. He goes off. I don't know where he's going. I don't know.
But the way that she does archaeology is this. She has the Bible in one hand and the sort of the pickaxe in the other. And the approach to it is pretty simple. It is, I want to find David's palace. Now, no one has ever heard of David's. I mean, David's palace is in the Bible, but there's no independent corroboration of it at all. There's a foundation in Jerusalem called the City of David Foundation. They have a little office. Dr. Elliot Mazar walks in their office and says to them, you have to move your office because the palace of David is in the ground underneath your office. And these guys are like, how would you know that? And Dr. Mazar says, because if you read the Bible, it will tell you that David, when he built his palace, brought in Phoenician builders who brought materials from Phoenicia and also brought Phoenician building expertise. The Phoenicians were apparently the builders of the day. And so Dr. Mazar says, we have found Phoenician seals, Phoenician coins, Phoenician inscriptions here. And so I predict that the palace is right underneath here because the Bible tells me that that's how that palace was built. So
David's palace exists.
David's palace is there for you to see today. Okay. And it is in the exact location of where it was said to be. And what I'm getting at is the archaeological approach here is to use the Bible as an archaeological tool. The location of Sodom and Gomorrah. There was a lot of speculation that said Sodom and Gomorrah were cities over here or cities over there, but actually it makes no sense because A, what we know about Sodom and Gomorrah is that they were once flourishing cities. 2, they were burned to ashes. 3, Abraham supposedly could see the smoke from a long ways away. And so these locations of Sodom and Gomorrah were never found until recently. By recent, I mean recent decades. An archaeologist, again in the Elliot Mazar tradition, takes the Bible and says, for Sodom and Gomorrah to exist, it's not enough to just go looking and see if we find stuff and go, hey, is this Sodom and Gomorrah? Let's actually follow the tracks of the Bible. Let's follow the map provided admittedly in very sketchy terms. The Bible is not trying to give you a map, but it's giving you clues. And based on these clues, the actual Sodom and Gomorrah is located, and you dig into it, and guess what? You find the remains of an ancient city, and you also find ash and debris. In other words, there was an ancient city there.
Sulfur balls, maybe. Yeah, I'm just reading this now.
It's circular reasoning. I think this is how Ron Wyatt found everything that he claimed too, is he said, well, right. I used the clues in the Bible, deduced a location, went and looked, and lo and behold, I found stuff that corresponds with what I was looking for. I mean, there were a lot of cities that burned down and therefore would be covered in ash in ancient times. Like, humans have been in that area for a very long time. They've built cities pretty much anywhere you can build a city. If you dig anywhere in the Middle East where a city might be, you tend to find ruins. That thing about Dr. Mazar, that's not quite what happened. There's a bit of a controversy about it. It's been going on at least a decade. And of course, the pro-Bible people say, oh, well, you know, she clearly proved that this is David. First of all, David had multiple palaces. He was a very powerful king, according to the Bible. But there's so much wrong with it. The TLDR is that while the site still being excavated may be David's palace, we have no reason to think it is David's palace, except for Dr. Mazar's assertions that it corresponds with what's in the Bible, and her assertions do not line up with what's in the Bible. There's a bunch of inferences. For example, in Samuel, I think it talks about the battles with the Phoenicians, and it says David descended from his palace to the stronghold. She took that to mean that his palace was outside the city walls and uphill, which means it would be to the north of where the fortress was. And that's why she went to the north of where the old city wall was. The fact that we found a building there doesn't mean she was right about that guess, you know?
Yeah, so Mazar basically they found this structure as the city of David. Now there's apparently a big debate over it. In 2020, this article is from basically that Mazar said it was it's a LSS, which is a large stone structure. It's a complication of fortifications, and they're of enormous magnitude. Basically, initial criticism was put forth by Professor Amarià Mazar, a researcher at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, that it's not just one structure. And Professor Abraham Forst of Bar-Ilan University, they rejected it, claims that it ends at it dates back to the end of the Iron Age 1. Guess what? A criticism was presented by Professor Israel Finkelstein, Professor David Chicken, there's a lot of criticism about that structure. And there's also criticism by some of the city's excavators. So 2 of the City of David's excavators in recent decades, Professor Ronnie Reich of Haifa University and Eli Shirokin of Israel Antiques Authority, both claimed that Ilya Mazar's dating is inaccurate and viewed her opinion that the LSS had changed the character of the city as incorrect. Reich and Shukron based their claims of unearthing the walls in various cities of David Archaeological Park, which indicate the city developed substantially in only the 8th century BCE, which is out of the sort of time frame. So there is contentious debate about it, but even 2 people working on the dig say it is not the Palace of David. So Dinesh is just sort of going, well, I believe the people that believe in the Bible. Okay, have we found the Palace of David? We don't know. We don't know. Because it's once we get a consensus of historians, then we go, well, we have a reasonable confidence that this is the case.
Yeah, and that's the problem with motivated reasoning. Like people, the Jewish scholars, it doesn't matter to them. Like they have the whole city of Jerusalem. If we find the Palace of David today, or we find it 100 years from now, it doesn't matter, because their faith isn't riding on that discovery, right? Even though they have the same holy text, they would rather be right. Like, this is the Palace of David. Let's be sure about it, so we're drawing the right historical conclusions. Whereas Dr. Mazar is trying to prove the Bible is true. She's motivated to say, based on what's in the Bible, I found the palace, therefore it is the palace, therefore the Bible was correct about the palace. It's... Yeah, I mean, the Jews have just as much reason to want to find the Palace of David, but they don't have that underlying motivation of assuming their own conclusion and trying to make that real.
And here's the thing, even if it was the palace, it doesn't get to the heart of what we want to know, whether these were supernatural events as described in the Bible. Like, whether or not it's the palace is David's is completely inconsequential to the narrative of Jesus. Doesn't matter in the slightest. So I don't understand what this is. It's
Dinesh trying to do the same thing as Dr. Mazar, to confirm the Bible's veracity when it not only doesn't fit, but isn't necessary.
Yeah, so Booba Sweat said that, like, Dinesh was like an eel, and I disagree. I think he's like a hagfish, like just creates a whole load of slime around him as a defense mechanism. Like, if you've ever seen a hagfish, they are disgusting creatures. They will basically secrete this slime in order to sort of escape being eaten, that just fills, like, upon contact with water, it just expands and fills area. It's insane. Yeah.
It was completely burned to the ground. So one of the great cities of the ancient world then becomes an absolute nothing, and has been an absolute nothing since. And not only does the Bible...
It's not an absolute nothing. It has ruins. How did they find some... Oh, idiot. Okay, I mean, he's speaking metaphorically, but he's really selling this, nonsense as oh boy.
will describe these events, but it says exactly that.
That
these great cities will cease to exist and will never be resurrected again as they have not been to this day.
If I may, because I'm beginning to suspect this isn't a question, I might just jump in here. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So the authors of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, but it also says that Tyre would never be inhabited, and Tyre still stands to this day. And they have to do the most amazing backflips to make that work. Like, oh, they meant the fortress, and that's not inhabited. They weren't talking about the city. No, they were talking about the city of Tyre. Like, what are you talking about? Like, seriously. They said Nebuchadnezzar would raise it to the ground. Oh, they were talking about Alexander the Great, who did it later on. No, they mentioned Nebuchadnezzar by name.
Yeah, and when you've got the details, they tend to be incorrect. Oops.
Yeah. And Nebuchadnezzar didn't raise to the ground. He did force them to give him tribute, and then he went north, and they sort of predicted, I think this was in Isaiah, I believe, they predicted that he would like conquer the realms of the north, going sort of northerly, and he still got his ass kicked by the Egyptians. So that's 0 for 2 on Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah.
My conclusion,
if I might answer the question, I mean, it is your time, but I need to be able to speak as well. The Bible contains accurate data about where archaeologically we can find the ruins of ancient cities. Okay, that's not too extraordinary to me. I have no problem saying that the people who wrote these texts knew where these places were with exact precision. And in fact, notice what's happening. Notice what's happening, in my view. What's happening is that the Bible is a historical text, and a scientific text when it needs to be, and it's not one when you don't want it to be. So when I said a moment ago, here's a relatively mundane historical fact about the Gospels, you said, well, the fact that some mundane historical fact should undermine Christianity is ludicrous. But now you're telling me that a mundane historical fact is enough to buttress Christianity. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too in that case.
I'm not trying to have my cake and eat it too.
Oh, he absolutely is. He absolutely is. When something matches up with science, even vaguely along the lines like the universe came into being, he says that proves the Bible. When it absolutely contradicts it, he's like, well, no, that's just rhetorical or hyperbole or metaphorical language. He is absolutely doing that. Wow.
Yeah, and it's so great to see Alex just straight line call him out on it and be like, you've got a double standard, my friend.
Oh, yeah.
Saying that if somebody gives a true account of events, complete with small details that are incidental to the narrative, the Bible refers to very minor figures at times. Let's take, for example, Caiaphas. Caiaphas is one of the 2 high priests who is present at Jesus's trial. We don't even know his first name. He's mentioned as Caiaphas. The historian Josephus calls him Josephus Caiaphas. And that is the only indication from Josephus, and only one source, and a source writing a little later, of what this guy's name even was. And until recently, a few decades ago, there was...
A lot of people didn't have last names. They just had either sort of, where they came from or, some kind of lineage. I know that in England, most people didn't have last names until sort of the plague kind of thing, because they just didn't move around a lot. Like the Black Plague is really why people started taking last names. But
we see that generally in the Bible, even. Yeah. That's why we have to differentiate James, the brother of Jesus, from James, son of Zebedee, because nobody's got freaking last names.
Yeah. Son of is usually how they were referred to, or they were referred to their place of birth, like Jesus of Nazareth,
Absolutely no corroboration that there was ever a guy even named Caiaphas. Except now, not only do we have inscriptions with his name, we actually have his bones.
But Dinesh, what does this matter?
Okay, so what I'm getting at
what
is...
does this matter at all to the question?
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Because if somebody is giving a true account of events, a guy comes running into this room and he goes, guess what? I've just witnessed a murder. He's going to give us a lot of accounts and a lot of detail, right? Now,
look, if somebody was trying to claim that Moses parted the Red Sea, and I said, well, how could you possibly know that's the case? And you said, well, look, we didn't have any evidence that a guy called Moses existed, but we've discovered this rock where someone wrote Moses was here.
No.
Great. Okay, we know Moses existed, and maybe we know where he existed. But the actual events, the stories that are attributed to these characters are in no way supported by anything that you're saying. And that's the important thing. I think that's what people are interested in. I doubt that anybody in this room, and they can make themselves known if they're here, I don't think anybody in this room either thinks that it's important or would be is troubled in their skepticism by the existence of these people and the real existence of places that are described in the Old Testament.
Right, and neither do I think that a single Christian believer in the world would be shaken by anything that you've said today. So let's really try.
I don't know about that, but this is one area where Alex.
Sorry, go ahead.
Alex could have summed up a bit more, and he's done a fantastic job of saying in a very few words what it takes us a whole lot of words to express. But in this case, he could have just said, Dinesh, you're showing textbook confirmation bias. You're saying because this thing is confirmed, the whole thing is confirmed. When we know that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of this thing of, well, no one is really worried about what you have said today kind of thing. That's not the point. His goal is not to, like, Dinesh is treating it like, oh, you've got a YouTube channel, you're just trying to make people into atheists. And I don't think Alex Connor is really doing that. And a lot of atheists are not there to, like, because it's sort of this projection of Christians. So they sort of go, well, you're just there to proselytize, to try and make people atheists. And that is not what atheists are actually doing. We're trying to give good reasons and a good methodology for believing in what we believe. And we find other people's, this Christian methodology of just have faith or look at the trees or whatever the methodologies that they're using, to be insufficient to warrant belief. And so we push back against the people that come out and say, you should believe, by saying, hey, your methodology for why you should believe is flawed. Like, it's absolutely flawed methodology. And Dinesh is proving it right here. This is a flawed methodology. If I say, hey, I found that this person claimed X, and so I'm going to take X, Y, Z, and everything else they said as true, that is a bad methodology for finding out what's true and what's false. A terrible methodology. Because con men especially will give you a tiny bit of truth and a lot of lies, right? But they will do truthful things. It's like remember those street guys that do find the lady and they have the cards and they do the thingo. They'll let somebody win a few times. They'll play it straight a few times. They'll give a bit of truth, and then the lie is smuggled in with that truth. Just because one thing seems like the truth or is likely true doesn't mean you should believe everything. We should apportion our belief with what we have evidence for. But yeah, Dinesh is like, well, if this thing's true, all of it's true. But he's sort of inferring that Alex is just trying to convert people to atheism or deconvert people, I guess. And I think that is a secondary consequence to actually criticism of Dinesh's thought processes. I think it's a secondary thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it speaks volumes that to Dinesh, any sound epistemology is the same as outright stating your beliefs are not true.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's just his bad epistemology, but maybe, because we see this from so many apologists, to a greater or lesser extent, they're more obvious about it, but most of them have that, where to even question means you're saying it's not true at all.
Right.
It kind of shows how feeble their faith actually is. Because if it were true, it would have nothing to fear from a sound epistemology. The fact they cannot use sound reasoning, it's a bit of an indictment.
Yeah.
Try to meet in the middle on the stuff that really matters. And I think what we're really saying, when you mention the parting of the Red Sea, to me, it's like, now we're talking. Because we're talking about...
These are different.
These are categorically different types of events.
I mean, what you just said, these are different because people are troubled by what I say and they're not troubled by what you say. Because for an atheist to say that Hezekiah existed doesn't mean they can't be an atheist. For a Christian to say that Jesus didn't historically rise from the dead means that they're not a Christian.
Correct.
So these are different. They're asymmetrical.
They're asymmetrical. So let's pick up the...
So it matters when the historical elements are wrong, in terms of our grand conclusion. For the Christian, it matters when the history gets it wrong. For the atheist, it doesn't matter when the history gets it right.
What I'm saying.
That look of confusion.
Yeah. Okay. I think it does matter to the atheist. I think Alex is slightly wrong, because it matters to the atheist if the conclusion of Jesus rose from the dead and is the Son of God and will judge you after you're dead. That does matter to an atheist if it is true. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about whether people existed, or, very inconsequential stuff. And yeah, that doesn't matter to us.
Yeah, like why does Dinesh keep going back to this inconsequential stuff? Like, where Alex wants to know about the rising from the dead. And Dinesh is like, well, Hezekiah was real. Great. Yeah. What about the rising from the dead?
Yeah, it's smoke and mirrors, because he doesn't know any, like, as you said, sound epistemology for Jesus rising from the dead. He doesn't know much about the Bible. He doesn't know much about, the story of Jesus rising from the dead at all. So I think, personally, then this is just my opinion, but I think it is smoke and mirrors to sort of detract from the actual having to talk about the rising of Jesus.
Yeah, it's deflection. It's like we've talked about before. Apologists use tactics. They don't engage honestly. Some of them, Greg Kokel, for instance, come right out and say, don't answer the question you're asked, substitute a different question that you can answer in a favorable way. Dinesh is less good at it.
Yeah, it's quite that, and the parting of the Red Sea again. This is a wild shot that Dinesh should not have taken, because the parting of the Red Sea, I mean, archaeologists know that there was no slaves in Egypt. It didn't happen. You have two cultures, the Canaanite culture and the Egyptian culture, enmeshed for hundreds of years, right? Hundreds of years. There is no possible way for that to happen and not have cultural contamination. Things flow from one to the other. Art, music, architecture, right? These things will traverse between. Think about how much influence went both ways in sort of the antebellum South, where the black people were slaves. All of America's sort of rock and roll is based upon black music. The influence of sort of sayings and things, like, we find none of that between Egypt and Canaan. Nothing flowed over. Nothing. That is almost impossible. It just is, especially architecture, because the Egyptians were amazing builders. They're building, and apparently they were using the slaves as manual workforce. But when the Canaanites got to building their own cities, they had none of the knowledge of the Egyptian building methods. Somehow,
they may have preferred their own building methods. Relatedly, we knew the Phoenicians were ocean travelers who were helping to spread culture, mesh it all around the Mediterranean and so forth. But we recently found a deepwater shipwreck that is definitely Canaanite in the Mediterranean. We didn't think the Canaanites could sail out of sight of land, and yet they could. And that's fascinating, because it shows that the Canaanite people were sailing somewhere. So they were conducting trade around the Mediterranean as well, which means they would have cultural contamination from every culture around the Mediterranean. They'd be spreading their culture. They'd be assimilating bits. That's one of the reasons that sailors are often a special class of worker. While they're expected to work until they die in a storm or something, they didn't just spend their coin freely. They also brought news from other lands. Think of Marco Polo returning from the Orient. There's talk of new technologies and new philosophies and new art styles and new music and so forth. And all this stuff, it's sailors who are bringing that stuff back. It's sailors who are spreading that to other cultures. So the Canaanites participating in that, it's unthinkable that they weren't absorbing stuff from the cultures around them.
But that's a big difference between sort of sailors bringing back new concepts and, being slaves under another nation. Look, at the time, what a consensus of historians is that they were a vassal state. It means that they were sort of enslaved by Egypt, kind of thing, but sort of in a national sense, right? That they offered tribute to Egypt for their protection. You know what I mean? Like their protection. But the whole point is that makes the story of like where they never left Egypt because they were never there. They were never there.
Yeah, a lot of it has the flavor of myth building, right?
Yeah.
Like, our people were enslaved before the conquest or whatever. Now, we know from what we know of the Israelites that they were just another tribe of Canaanite people, possibly exiles from the other tribes, but that's a whole other thing. You start building this mythology of how the conquest happened, and where did this come from? And we were in Egypt. Okay, well, how did you get here from Egypt? Well, we had to cross the Red Sea. Well, how did that happen? Well, Moses, the guy with the magical powers, he just parted the waters. Like, it's just one thing on another. It's ancient apologetics to explain away the inconsistencies in the previous made-up story.
Yeah, there were small numbers of Hebrew in Egypt, yes, but we're talking about an entire people enslaved. That's
millions of slaves escaping all at the same time after a tremendous series of plagues that the Egyptians, for some reason, never bothered to write down. None of them.
Yeah, and sort of so that's how we know it was a myth. But it's sort of this idea that the sort of the Pharaoh was this evil character, and they wouldn't let them go, kind of thing, and they God sorted them out, kind of thing. Of course it's myth building, of course it is. We have this all the time where someone whose interest does not align with your own is built up as this nefarious character that hates your people, kind of thing. But it's just a way to explain why you hate those people over there in Egypt who enslaved your people. A vassal state isn't enslaving them, but that's how myths get created. We were had to suffer through these horrible people, but it didn't actually happen. It's just poetry. It's just a way of explaining things, as Ember said.
Thing is that if someone gives a true account of events, it is normal for the accounts to vary, to differ, in some cases to have minor contradictions. Sure. The real question is did the thing that's being described actually happen? Okay, so let's turn to that.
Do you think, for example, that the slaughter of the Amalekites I mentioned before actually happened?
Probably, of course.
And if that happened, I mean, we haven't spoken about the concept of moral truth. I'd like to get the time to
we can come to that, but let's focus.
I don't think you want to do that. Moral truth with Dinesh D'Souza, he wouldn't know morality if it leapt up and bit him in the ass. Like, seriously.
He's not the guy for that subject.
No.
It's funny, though, that he's like, let's jump to this, which is the thing that Alex has been driving at the entire debate.
Yeah.
With what I think you were about to get to, which I think is the heart of the matter that we haven't even gone to, and that's this. The Bible is, where the Bible is the most unbelievable is in its account of astounding and miraculous events. Sure. Right? Healings.
Absolutely.
Let's take the most outrageous event of all. Which is, let's just say, bringing a guy back from the dead. Yep. Presented in the Bible as a miracle.
I'm talking about Lazarus here.
I'm talking about Lazarus. Yes, Lazarus. Perfect. Now, for a Christian would say this. A, The Bible doesn't try to prove it, it simply asserts it. In fact, it presents it as a truth of revelation, if you will. God revealed this. It's a miracle, which is to say that it is not something that happens within the seeming known laws of nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. And
are you saying we should, if something claims to be outside the laws of nature, we should just give it a pass on evidence?
I'm struck by the whole, it's not presented as history, it's presented as divine revelation. I'm like, weren't these gospels supposedly written by eyewitnesses?
Well, it certainly does conflict sort of his aim at sort of establishing it as historically accurate. Now it's sort of, I don't know, spiritually accurate?
I mean, that sure is a tactic. Sure, it's not literally true. It's not actually true. But what if it's spiritually true?
Right.
What does that even mean, Dinesh?
Yeah, I don't know.
Question really here is, are these kinds of miracles possible? If you say, are they implausible, or are they rare, or is it difficult?
Well, not to our knowledge. I haven't parted the Red Sea lately. So here's what he's doing, or here's at least what I think he's doing. I think he's going for it is a low bar to clear. Like I think he's doing William Lane Craig's of drop that bar, you know, like let's limbo, ladies and gentlemen. Let's limbo right now.
How low
basically,
can you go?
If it's not like, because is it possible? That's a vague question. What kind? Is it logically possible? Is it physically possible? Is it sort of, you know, all of these possibilities? But I think he's going for, is it logically possible? And if it is logically
he's cheating
possible,
too.
How so?
He's saying he's substituting "is it possible" for "is it not impossible." Like, we can't say, is a miraculous resurrection, is it impossible? We can't answer that. But is it possible? Right. It seems to be the same question, but it isn't, because to say something is possible, you have to have some way to demonstrate that it's viable, that it's plausible, that there's a reason to think it might ever happen.
No, not logically. So when you get down to logically, all that matters is that it doesn't have a logical contradiction. That it is, in fact, like, so if you were looking at a syllogism, is it a valid syllogism? So, you're basically looking at, does it violate logic in any way? The problem there is that if you attribute God can do literally anything, then no, a lot of these miracles, they don't violate logic. So a syllogism may be, well, if there is a God and if he is all powerful, then it, you know, he could do this. Well, that's not logically, that doesn't violate logic. That's the whole point between sort of, but then again, a magic unicorn doesn't violate logic either. That's the thing. Something like a married bachelor violates logic, right? The law of non-contradiction, that violates logic. But God doing a miracle doesn't necessarily. But as I said, that's a low bar to clear, right? Because magic unicorns aren't logically impossible either. So logical possibility isn't the same as sort of possibility in the real world. Like, it's just saying whether the train of thought has any logical contradictions in it. That's all. Which is a low bar.
Oh, for sure. But I think you may be being overly generous with him. I don't think he's going with logical possibility. I think I don't
really?
know that he knows logic well enough to go there.
Okay, well, let's find out.
Well, to believe, the Christian is like right with you.
I think the question is, did they happen?
Did they happen? Right? And the Christian, here's where the Christian and the atheist are on common ground, because the Christian and the atheist would both say that based upon ordinary experience, it can't happen.
Sure.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be a miracle.
So what evidence might we have to suggest that these
miraculous... Wait, it can't happen or it wouldn't be a miracle. So he's wow. He's basing the plausibility of it on the fact that it never happens. Interesting tactic.
Who needs, we're talking about contradictions. Who needs logical consistency? It's fine. I'm fascinated that while Dinesh was blathering, Alex just casually refilled both of their waters.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just...
Yeah, Boober noticed that too. Yeah, what a guy. What a guy. Absolutely. Yeah, what a gentleman. And I love this. He's being gracious and gentlemanly. I love it. Alex is an amazing person, like really. You know, I think he's absolutely comfortable where he is. I mean, he must have dealt with a lot of people in philosophy with a lot more. So basically, is this affirming the consequent? He's basically going, well, if a miracle is miraculous, we won't see it every day or at all, basically, because it is so exceptional to natural laws. We don't see miracles, therefore miracles are real. We shouldn't expect to see miracles, right?
But don't forget the double standard. The evidence of God is all around us. The fact that existence exists is a miracle, therefore God. Look at the trees, all of those things.
Yeah, I'm just talking about his argument at the moment, sort of saying, well, we shouldn't expect to see if miracles are a exception by God, then we shouldn't expect to see miracles. We don't see miracles, therefore they exist. That's terrible logic. That's terrible logic. That violates logic. That is completely.
What's the contrary on
valid.
that? Miracles are commonplace. We see them every day. Therefore, they don't exist.
Events described in the Gospels did happen.
I'm saying that because the miraculous events, the Christian would simply say, if God exists, miracles are obviously possible.
Sure, I agree.
The atheist has a higher burden, and that is the atheist.
Really?
What? Only if you shift it, Dinesh. Only if you shift it.
What a stupid move. He doesn't even have to. Okay, whatever.
No, I'm right. He's going to logically possible, right? He's going to logically possible. Right? But here's the thing. Your mother spontaneously combusting is logically possible. Does that mean it happened? No. What we're looking for is whether it actually happened. A lot of things that never happened are logically possible. So this is him clearing a bar lying on the wow. So should we believe everything that's logically possible? Absolutely not, because things that are logically possible are contradictory. You buying milk on today and you not buying milk today, they're both logically possible, right? But they can't both be true. One thing either happened or it didn't. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible.
Has to say that whether or not God exists, which is not the topic of our debate here, miracles are impossible. Because if they're possible...
No. That's not true.
Yeah, there's plenty of atheists who do believe in miracles. All atheism is
you don't have to say that.
Of course not.
Not being
you don't have to say that. You say it is possible for a man to be raised from.
I said all atheism is being not being convinced that there's a God. There are spiritual atheists. There are atheists who buy into all manner of woo-woo. The atheists believe all kinds of things. The only thing atheist means is not convinced there's a God. And even the most skeptical of us aren't running around saying miracles aren't possible. We just, speaking only for myself, there's this presupposition, because we all have presuppositions, we can admit that that if I observe something that seems miraculous, it is much more likely that I just don't understand what I just saw, rather than it actually is supernatural.
Well, let me point out what he's doing, because I think I have a handle on it, and I think I'm right. So what he's doing is he's kind of, in a very, very dishonest way, is making a category error. So he's basically saying miracles are logically possible, and you agree with that. But then don't forget, okay, and think about this. He switched to the atheist has to say that miracles are impossible. By that way that he's set up that dichotomy, he should be saying atheists say that miracles are logically impossible. What did I just say? That, yeah, miracles are logically possible, but we want to know if they actually happened, right? So what he's basically doing is making a conflation between two categories. He's making a conflation between logically impossible and whether it actually happened impossible, physically impossible, right? By naturalism kind of stuff, right? So he's conflating those two categories. Impossible in the sense of logically impossible, and impossible of the sense as naturally impossible. Right? So he's conflating these two because he wants there to be, well, you've got to now show that miracles are impossible. Under naturalism, like naturally impossible, he would agree with that, right? Because the context is under naturalism, because you need more than naturalism to make a miracle, right? So Dinesh would agree with that they're naturally impossible, but God makes them possible. They're logically possible, but not under naturalism, which is naturally impossible.
It's an excellent point, because I wouldn't have seen that. To me, it just looks like Dinesh is making an incoherent argument. He's saying, you're saying it's both possible and impossible at the same time, which doesn't make sense.
Right. And he's doing it on purpose because he's trying to conflate. Darth Dawkins does a lot of this. He'll conflate sort of logically with, is this possible at all? And when we're talking possible, we're usually talking sort of naturally possible. So it's just a conflation and sort of a category error where he's putting things in the realm of logic that shouldn't be there. Because atheists don't think that miracles are logically impossible, or a God is logically impossible. It's just, logic doesn't cover that kind of thing.
I can say that that's possible without thereby
saying, but you're saying, but this particular one didn't happen, but the event is possible.
Without thereby in any way telling us anything about whether it happened as reported.
Is it possible is it possible for the Red Sea to be parted?
Sure, why not?
It is.
Okay.
Okay.
But,
is it possible for
But what does that do for us? Is it possible that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse?
Okay, so here's our problem.
Well, yes or no?
Yes, of course it's possible.
Of course it's possible. So that means that the miraculous events described in Islam.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Is it possible that leprechauns, hide a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Sure, it's possible. There's nothing logically impossible about that. You can appeal to divine hiddenness and sort of say, hey, it's leprechaun hiddenness. They just hide it.
Mm-hmm. In fact, that's part of the legend. They're notoriously not easy to find.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we should believe that or that it's true. So this is where he's doing really dodgy conflation stuff. He's got to put a lot of words around it. He's definitely a hagfish. He's making a lot of slime, but it's still there that he's conflating these two different definitions of possible and impossible, or logically possible and just impossible naturally, and conflating them to try and get a point across. But Alex is brilliant. He gets an example from another thing that Dinesh thinks is absolutely wrong and says, apply it to that. You have to believe that as well. If you want to be intellectually consistent based upon your argument, you should believe that as well. Why not? Why not?
You've got such a higher burden of proof than the Muslim does if you're having a debate with a Muslim.
But
because you have to say that's impossible.
I am not trying to prove the veracity of this or that miracle. I freely admit that I can't do that.
I'm not trying to prove the veracity of this
but you
or that
can't
miracle.
disprove it either.
No, of course I can't disprove it.
Exactly.
But that's not my task here. That's like me saying, you know, I think that, I don't know, to take a Shakespearean example, I think that, you know, spoiler alert, you know,
Well, we don't need a Shakespearean example.
Romeo took the poison.
Let's take an actual.
And if you said, well, hold on, how do you know that that actually happened? And I said, well, you can't prove that it didn't.
Well, let's
which is shifting of the burden of proof. Absolutely. And that's what he's doing. He's burden shifting. He's just going, well, I claim that a god parted the Red Sea. You say it's impossible. The burden's on you. No. No, you're making the positive claim. The burden is on you to show that it actually happened.
I wonder if he's got a checklist of fallacies. Like, first we'll try shifting the goalposts, and if that doesn't work, then we'll try shifting the burden, and if that doesn't work, we'll try shifting the ground. After poisoning the well, we have to get that. Got to have these things in the right order.
Yeah. Wow, he's so dodgy. He's so dodgy.
Let's pick an actual example that pertains to Christianity. Let's talk about something I raised earlier.
The audio's turned to shit.
Do you believe?
Oh dear. Okay, give me a sec. I know how to fix this. I will be back in a second. I just got to close all my windows. Just one sec. Entertainment.
Where's my pirate flag? So to get my button open so I can turn on the pirate flag, first I have to enable the Wi-Fi, because this computer is set up for it's got a direct Ethernet connection to the modem. But I need the Wi-Fi on to control my OBS buttons on my remote control here. And then I have to turn on the software that does the actual button controlling. So it's a bit of a process. Let's see if I can get the pirate flag up before Mark gets back. I'm smushing all my words together into one piece. Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate that. I put in some effort today. Oh, and Mark has returned.
Yes. Hello.
You beat me. I was racing you as to whether I could get my pirate flag up before you got back.
Oh, look, do the pirate flag. I'm here for the pirate flag.
I'm almost there. So I had to turn on the Wi-Fi and turn on the various doodads. There we go. There it is.
Oh,
I thought I'm in the wrong OBS setting, aren't I? Why am I bad at this? There we go.
There you go.
All my buttons are out of whack.
You don't have to know what
lubbers.
timestamp we're up to, do you?
No, I tried to look before everything got closed, but our heads were in the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me have a look. We have a sort of ongoing recording of this thing. Thanks, YouTube. Oh, yeah, no, our heads are in the way, aren't they? Okay.
Alas.
Maybe I can just make an estimate based on how far through it is.
Oh, from the last stable state method or something like that. Oh, I can't see the end time either.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Acts like the God of only the Israelites.
Listen
And
to
so
what you're saying,
Israel's
Mitch.
enemies.
Listen to what you just said. Waved away.
All right, hang on.
Jesus, and you keep filibustering me because you know
Not life after death. That's fine. You can believe that. Not like
known laws of nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. And
I mean, what you just said. These are different because people are troubled by what I say, and they're not troubled by what you say. Because
to that,
do you think, for example, that the slaughter of the Amalekites that I mentioned before actually happened?
Otherwise, it wouldn't be a miracle.
So, what evidence might we have?
But
because you have to say that's impossible.
I am not trying to prove the veracity of this or that miracle. I freely admit that I can't do
I'm
that.
not trying to prove the veracity.
But you can't disprove it either.
No, of course I can't disprove it.
Exactly.
But that's not my task here. That's like me saying, you know, I think that, I don't know, to take a Shakespearean example, I think that, you know, spoiler alert, you know,
But we don't need a Shakespearean example.
Romeo took the poison.
Let's take an actual.
And if you said, well, hold on, how do you know that that actually happened? And I said, well, you can't prove that it didn't.
Well, let's pick an actual example that pertains to Christianity. Let's talk about something I raised earlier.
We've got about 5 minutes before Q&A.
Okay. Do you believe that there is life after death?
I don't know.
You don't have no idea.
Yeah, I'm agnostic on that.
So if I say that there's life after death, am I being unreasonable?
I don't think so.
Not at all.
It depends on your reasons.
It depends on my reasons, but what I'm saying is if I were to tell you that there is no empirical way to prove this one way or the other, my faith, let's say, that there's life after death is just as reasonable as someone who says there isn't.
So, sure, it depends on what the reasons that are given are, of course, but sure. That's,
We're talking about the reasons that are actually available. Not the person who's giving a reason may give the best or not the best reason.
It's pedantic, but I'm happy to say yes. I just want to be careful what I say, because people might get the wrong impression of my beliefs. But yeah, sure. I mean, sure. We've got two people. One says life after death. One says not. They're both just as reasonable.
They're both just as reasonable.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Good.
Maybe. Don't know about that one. I think they believe it for different reasons, but yeah, pretty much. I get what he's saying. The both are within the bounds of reason. Yes.
Very speculative.
Yeah.
I wanted to clarify that point particularly because
What's
what
this
it
got to
really
do with the truth of the Bible?
well, all I am saying is that the claims of miracles, you and I are not going to be in a position to go back and see whether or not Jesus raised a man from the dead.
That's
right?
not all you say. It's not all you're saying.
The Christian is perfectly willing to take that on faith.
You think that did happen, and you're taking it on faith, and that's fine. Like,
Yes.
more power to you. And in fact, I envy your ability to believe things despite what
Well,
seems to
don't
me
you
like
take a lot of things on faith?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of things on faith.
Yeah, all the time.
So all the
time.
things that you take on faith
Yeah.
are things that you think are not unreasonable, but the things that
It depends how he's using faith, to be honest with you. Because the things taken on faith, like life after death, I don't think we've got very solid evidence for, and that's fine. And I was sort of talking to somebody who said, when I said sort of the difference between, this faith, they're like, faith is just confidence based upon evidence. And it's like, well, that isn't the biblical definition, and it's not how you use that term, for something like life after death, right? Because you don't have evidence of that. You have a Bible's claim of that, but that's not evidence. That's the claim.
It's, shoot, I forget the word for it, but it's when you're deliberately utilizing the ambiguity of a word with multiple definitions. Equivocation. You're taking one version of faith and saying, well, you have the other version of faith, therefore my faith, which is the other version of faith, is as valid as yours. You have faith the sun will rise. No, well, from a certain point of view, but we have an expectation based on years of previous experience.
Yeah.
Your faith is not based on previous experience. It's epistemologically bankrupt. So it's not the same thing.
And faith seems to be believing in something in contradiction of evidence as well. Like when they say you've got to have faith kind of thing. It seems to be contradictory towards what evidence tells you. So I don't have a lot of time for that version of faith. If you just mean faith as confidence, well, fine. That's fine. Then yes, I have faith under that definition. But most people aren't using it that way when they talk about why you should believe something. When we talk about why we believe, like say evolution or whatever, right? We don't say, well, because I have confidence in it. That isn't what we're using, right? We're not saying that.
And
we're saying,
internally,
faith
fails epistemologically there too, because if your primary evidence for Christianity, for the Bible being true, is, well, you just have to have faith, that's the same evidence the Islams are offering, the Muslims are offering, the Hebrews are offering, the Mormons are offering, the Jehovah's Witnesses are offering, etc., etc., etc. Clearly, faith is not enough from an unbeliever standpoint to distinguish between these things. And if you're claiming your thing is true, you have to demonstrate something that is better than what everybody else has to offer.
Yeah.
Christians take on faith are to you unreasonable because they can't be corroborated with historical evidence.
Is that what I said? I don't remember saying that.
So are the Christian beliefs on faith just as reasonable as everything that you believe on
It
faith?
can be, depending on the reasons, but the veracity of the gospel accounts and the Old Testament.
What? Wow, that was wild. So you believe in the law of gravity. You believe in germ theory. You believe in evolution and that the moon goes around the sun. So since these are things you believe, and you believe they're reasonable, then doesn't that make the things I believe, like a man walked on water and an undead carpenter ghost will enter your heart to save your soul, since we're both using the word believe, they're just as reasonable, right?
That is wild.
It makes me wish for an undead carpenter ghost.
You got to have it.
Prophecy, I think, is unreasonable to believe in. Not life after death. That's fine. You can believe that. Not like, a man called Jesus rose from the dead. Fine. But the idea that the Bible comports with reality either in a mythological sense, in an allegorical sense, in a moral sense, or in a in the sense of
let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about
I want to
briefly.
make sure we've got time for Q&A. But look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites.
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because
The moral sense of the Bible. Well, let's talk about the Amalekites. Let's not talk about the Amalekites. No, let's. I love that. That's awesome, censored. Let's not talk about the immoral things in the Bible. That's just silly. Come on, why would we talk about that in our discussion about morality in the Bible, moral truths in the Bible? Why? Why? What?
Here's a problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New. So if you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he considers
later,
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because
I don't really want to go there. Yeah. I don't really want to go there because it makes me uncomfortable and I squirm in my chair. Wow.
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well, the reason I don't want to go there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
massacres
which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh.
Appear to be ordained.
Dinesh is a lawyer now.
They were mistaken? What is this language? Appear to be. So your infallible book that is not contradictory at all. You're just saying it appears like that. What is going on?
I mean the conquest talks about I forget which city, but Moses says, God says, kill them all, and so Joshua goes forth and he kills all the men and he kills all the women and he kills all the little boys, but the little girls he keeps. And he says, oh, I just didn't have it in me. They're so sweet and innocent. And, well, God's not happy about that because God said, no, kill them all. I may be mixing my Bible stories, but you get the idea. Like, they actually do fail to carry out the objective, and God corrects them rather violently. He doesn't just endorse it. He doesn't just say it's okay. He commands specifically how it's to be done. Because it's too hard to do it himself. They have iron chariots and things.
Iron chariots, yeah. Wow.
Exactly. Agreed. And
why are you saying Yahweh instead of God? Why are you trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader.
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself from and say that it's sort of different to the New Testament.
I'm saying that
that's not what Jesus thought.
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
Tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the development.
I want to make
don't let him off the hook.
Yeah, I want to make a quick note here. That's another contradiction, because Jesus does say, "I come not to fulfill the law, and none of it will change," etc., etc. But then in a different conversation, he says, well, Moses said divorce was cool, and it's in the law how divorces happen and so on and so forth. And it really is. It's in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. It's in that long list of the Mosaic law, how divorces are to be carried out and whatnot. But then in another conversation, Jesus says, Moses said divorces are fine. I say, no. I say that's bullshit. There will be no divorces. Mm-hmm. That's what God intended. Moses changed what God said. So which way is it? Is he keeping the law or is he correcting the law?
I have no idea. I don't really care, to be honest with you. Like, it just is, it's just another contradiction for the pile.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not wrong. And I love how he's not letting Janesh off the hook. Like, and he pointed out, why is he suddenly using Yahweh like it's a different God? He's trying to divorce himself from the Old Testament, and a lot of them do. But a lot of Christians will claim moral absolute, which means that it can't change. It was either immoral then and immoral now, or it's not.
The Amalekites. It's about the way that the whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message.
I mean, for example, help me out here. Like, just tell me where, any way you like. Tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay, I'll tell you where.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me.
The underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now, hold on.
The children, the infants,
the children,
the cattle,
infants,
the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, that Dennis Prager says.
Oh, you got to watch out for those donkeys. They're lethal. Lethal. Left to their own devices, the donkeys would have crushed the Israelites under hoof. What are you talking about, Dinesh? Oh, wow. Wow.
Yes, but my point is different. You will not find that spirit at all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend like you don't have this. I mean, Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right? When Christ comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the lamb. The point is those blood sacrifices aren't necessary anymore. That's the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering.
Wait. What? Did he just say you keep filibustering as he
sure did
non-stop? Wow. Where's my irony emoji?
Yeah, and also don't forget we're talking about the moral upgrades of Christianity. So in the Old Testament, they sacrifice doves, and yes, I know there's child sacrifice in the older parts of the Old Testament, but I'm talking like just before Jesus showed up. They're sacrificing doves and rams and so forth. And then Jesus shows up, and now suddenly it's human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be morally better?
You're just filibustering, he says, as constantly talking so he can't get a word in edgewise. That's hilarious. I can't believe he just said that. That's wow.
Me, because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible. Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need you to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I'm getting sick whenever
you're cross-examining me on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the...
And he still isn't allowed to talk. Like, come on, where's the moderator in this? This is like, there's only one person filibustering on this stage, and it is not Alex, because he isn't the one constantly talking and making points. Like, now he's just yelling and kind of preachy a little bit, I guess, because he isn't actually engaging with Alex. And the
eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that, yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like,
that is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
Let me just make a quick point. I have to make this point.
Okay.
I've got to read the text from Joshua as well.
Okay, and then we'll check in with the audience, because we're probably, I think the audience is going to agree that we want this to keep going.
No, that's fine.
Instead of going to Q&A, but we'll check in just after Alex's point.
I think it's important, like, read these texts for yourself. There's no way that I'm misreading this text. We know that this is what's happening. In the slaughter of Ai, Ai, that's a type of Canaanite. In Joshua, we're told that when Israel had finished killing all of the men in Ai, in the fields and in the wilderness, where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. That is to say that we're told that this is just because the promised land was inhabited, and God's God, he's allowed to do this. So because the Israelites want that land, they have to go and chase out the Ai. So they chase them into the wilderness. They chase after them.
Yeah, because the Bible clearly states that it was because the land was promised to the Israelites. Right? It isn't because they were attacking. It isn't because God says, I have given you that land. Go and take it from them. That's the reason. It's not, hey, they're attacking you and you've got to defend yourself. It is, they are on your land that I have given you.
Slaughter them in the wilderness. They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children. This is intolerable, and I cannot have it simply waved away.
All right, hang on. Let me just for a second.
It can't happen. It can't keep happening.
You're completely blind to the irony of what you're saying.
Moderation.
Dinesh, can we pause for...
Yeah, suddenly. Yeah,
and it's not to moderate, it's to interrupt the flow. Love it.
Just a second. Yeah. Okay, everyone who wants to go to Q&A right now, make a loud noise. Everyone who wants the discussion to continue on and eat up the Q&A time, cheer. Okay, sorry guys, we're gonna let them roll through Q&A.
All right, we might have some time.
The poor cameraman. But also, like we mentioned last week, this is so fucking infuriating because there was that big, like, half an hour long prelude to this thing where that guy and his buddy were chit-chatting. It wasn't...
Yeah.
That could have been the Q&A, and I think people would have liked having a Q&A better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Christianity invented the just war tradition, according to which the slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this. Everybody did it. And everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too.
So you didn't gain much from Christianity, and also Christianity didn't start doing that.
I didn't think... Yeah, I don't think they invented the just war concept. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I mean,
like across
Islam
all
had
of
a
history,
tradition of sort of, not
the Persians. The Persians had a moral law that precedes the laws of Moses and are better laws, and in part of those laws is the concept of limited warfare. Now, that's not to say they never participated in total war. Every culture that's ever existed has done a genocide at some point. But they had the concept enshrined in their laws while the Israelites were committing a genocide.
Yeah.
So it's not Christians that brought that about.
And it's irrelevant what the Christians did later, because you are claiming, and he brought up the Red Sea, that God parted the Red Sea for Moses kind of thing, right? So he's tying this deity into his God amalgamation. It is the same God that he's talking about. So the whole point is that how can you say, like, is it the case that God's nature is what makes a morality at that point? Because God seems to have decided that things that were immoral are no longer moral. So therefore, what is to stop God from declaring genocide moral again? What's to stop him from saying, hey, those people, those brown people over there in, I don't know, Bhutan or something, you can go take their land by slaughtering them. But we know that that is wrong. we know that that is a horrible thing to do.
Does Jesus ever say that genocide is wrong? I don't think that actually has changed with the coming of Jesus. But to your point, you can't say God is eternally unchanging, perfectly moral, and then, but Jesus made it better.
Yeah.
That's another contradiction.
The bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hamburg, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The incineration of women and children is the normal course of war. I just watched the World War II documentary in which they interview an old...
Let's talk about Tulsa for a moment. That's a bit of a black mark in American history, both literally and figuratively, because they destroyed an affluent African-American culture, doing very well here in the United States. They called it Black Wall Street. If you Google Black Wall Street, you'll find the story, because we don't teach it in history classes. It was not wartime. We don't even need the justification of a war for our Christian patriots to start killing civilians.
Bomber, U.S. bomber pilot, and he goes, I was given a bombing mission to hit a target. I asked the U.S. authorities, who's in the building? They said 20,000 women and children. And this guy kind of breaks down. You can watch this on Netflix. And he goes, I'm like, what the hell? You want me to kill 20,000 women and children? He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting...
So Christianity helped him a whole lot there, didn't it?
I don't know what his point is in all of this, because we're not talking about whether somebody does something immoral. We're talking about whether a perfectly moral being can do genocide.
At is
that everybody does it.
It is not ethical. It is not. But I'm simply saying, Alex, that you are a product of the Christian morality that repudiates it now. You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians.
Morality is not Christian.
The irony.
Dinesh.
I mean, Dinesh isn't the only one who does this, right? That guy from Premier Unbelievable does this too. A bunch of other guys.
Yeah.
But to use Dinesh's words is, Dinesh and the other apologists are standing on a moral mountain built by pagans and claiming it's Christianity that got them there.
Yep. I mean, the Greeks had a very structured morality kind of thing. A lot of our Western culture is based upon ancient Greek. Even our political systems are based on ancient Greeks. We don't have priests and holy men in charge. We have, a system of representation, which the Greeks essentially founded, through Athens and their democratic processes. We're not standing on Christian morality. Christian morality has been terrible throughout the years. We sort of got to this place in spite of Christian morality, not because of it. Christians are always the last people in the boat on morality. They always are.
Yeah, we see that now here in the U.S. As Kamikaze points out, America's doing its best to flip that. There's a movement to force religion into schools again in multiple states. And that's clearly in violation of every rational moral principle, but because it's in service to the glory of God, whether it's moral or not goes right out the window. And that's exactly the same thinking that justifies genocides. It's for the glory of God.
Well, they don't think it can be immoral if God orders it. So regardless of the harm and consequence that sort of a secular humanist would see and say, hey, the consequences of this are harmful, so it is immoral, they basically go, well, if God wants it, or if I think God wants it, then it's moral, which is horrifying. And it's unconstitutional, but they got a plan for that as well. I mean, they got a plan for that as well. They're basically going to stack the Supreme Court and just rule everything as constitutional.
Well, even without that, I mean, yes, they're banking on the court's 6-3 conservative majority being on their side, which is a silly bet, as we've seen from some of the decisions this particular Supreme Court has made. But even without that, they still do this kind of shit. They're more bold about it now, but they still do it because they understand that even if a law gets struck down, that takes time. And in that time, while it's working its way through the courts, they get to continue to do it, even if it is illegal.
Yeah.
They taught you to talk like this.
These people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women.
That's right.
Children.
The ancient Israelites were, but the ancient Israelites are not what taught you. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral. Whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics, God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them,
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world, which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No.
But this isn't those people deciding to do something on their own. This is...
Yeah.
And your point was when Joshua didn't slaughter all of the girls and animals, God commanded him to get back there and finish the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's an excellent point, that it's not just that this was a barbaric world. They wouldn't have done these things if not directly commanded by their God, according to the story.
Yeah.
Oh, God does not say keep going. But what God does is and again, this is called,
I think it actually says God was pleased at one point, like.
Oh, yeah. All the burning flesh was an aroma pleasing unto the Lord. It's pretty fantastic. Oh my goodness. I do appreciate how Alex is seeing right through Dinesh's bullshit. Like you and I, occasionally we get red herringed and we engage Dinesh in the argument he's making to show how it's wrong. But Alex is just like, no, I'm not even engaging with that because it's totally aside from the actual point, which is your God, the beacon of morality, is commanding these things.
Trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that. It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
That's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does. I'm saying that the way it happens historically is God takes a side.
Yeah, but the problem is if you're saying that God is just a fictional character and it's just a metaphor for how they viewed their enemies at the time, you're talking about moral relativism. And I'm okay with that. Yes, moral relativism. To them, it was fine because that was the culture at the time. To them, it was moral. I don't judge them by that because to them, I mean, it was sort of the things that were happening at the time. I get that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a God that commands them to do that and knows that it is immoral.
Yeah, like he talks about how God didn't command people not to kill their women and children, not to take slaves. Why didn't he? He commanded 623 things. Most of them are worship me or else, but never mind that. Yes. He could command. He's also all-powerful. So why did he not? But also, Dinesh is dead wrong about God was limited by the culture of the people at the time. No, he didn't just say slavery was okay. He gave commands on how to carry it out. But also, slavery was not okay at the time. The Persian Empire, the next door neighbors, had outlawed slavery generations before the Israelites showed up.
Yeah.
The area wasn't like that. The Israelites didn't bring a beacon of morality and civilization. They brought a whole new era of barbarism to a civilized area.
Mm-hmm.
The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God. He acts like a tribal God, right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
Well,
and so Israel's enemies...
Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that
your enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race, because
how else do you interpret?
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern
tribe.
world.
Call it tribe if you like.
I don't know why. What is he doing?
Mm-hmm.
He's basically going, yeah, God was acting like an invention of tribal, people with no understanding of morality. Why?
And also, the unchanging God changes. And also, it wasn't just a replacement of polytheism with monotheism. The way the other gods are talked about in the Bible, whether it's Baal, whose priests had actual powers, or the Egyptian gods, whose priests had actual powers, or Asherah, who Yahweh was so afraid of that her shrine specifically had to actually be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about them as if they're just as real as he is, because they were. I mean, in a way, they still are. They're all made up, so they are just as real. But
I get you. Yeah, they're just as fictional as one another. Yeah, absolutely. No, I get you.
These are clans.
You treat
these are militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, when you say, like, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained.
Well, there is a reason. It's because, like, you're then having to give away 2 slaves and not 1. Oh, you mean a reason for God? Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, details.
Yeah. No, there was definitely reasons for the slave owners not to want to give away their female slaves.
Yeah, and this touches on a point that Eric over at Skeptics and Scoundrels frequently makes, and I keep referencing because it's a great point. It doesn't take much if you were God and you change the rule so that the women slaves and the children slaves get to leave with the father slave. You are now more moral than Dinesh's God. You're still immoral, but you're more moral than the perfectly moral being.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a bit of a problem about the truth of the fairy tale too.
And if I was an omnipotent being, why couldn't I just say, under no circumstances will you own another person? Women are the equal of men. Don't
People
attack your
property.
neighbors.
Work
with your neighbors instead of attacking them. It's so bizarre that God is limited by what the humans are doing on Earth. Like, it's so bizarre. especially when he's saying, don't wear mixed thread and don't boil a lamb in its mother's milk or something. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares?
You turn the story around and you say, well, how did this come to be? Well, people would start doing a very immoral practice, like, boiling a lamb in its mother's milk. That's just rude. Or, enslaving people. And people would say, well, your God's supposed to be good. Why are you doing this? And they would say, well, because God said so. That's the only context it makes sense, is people took the practices they were doing anyway and justified it by saying, God said so.
Yeah, or you're a particularly bloodthirsty priest like Moses, and you wanted that land for your people. Will you just say, well, God told me?
I've been hearing voices, and they said to wander around the desert for 40 years, that a person could walk across in a week.
Yeah. So it's
ordained by God, but look, it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinic.
The rabbis, but not me. That's not my God. It is your God, Dinesh. Why the rabbis? It's the same freaking God.
Tradition that discusses
and
every fine point, as you know. But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi
isolate
either.
the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
tell me how
if someone
specifically the New
were to
Testament
listen to
undoes
you,
this.
they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians. They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way, because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So you have to explain why you take a universal.
Yeah, but Christians also enslaved people up until the point. Did they not? Wasn't the not only the England but sort of France and Spain predominantly Christian? Wasn't most of Europe so they were the ones taking the slaves up until that point? I mean, other cultures were doing it as well, don't get me wrong, but if the Bible was so clear about it, then why were they doing it up until that point?
And
why is their entire feudal system where there were bondsmen who were actually owned by the Lord as part of the land?
Yeah, it's so wild. Like, in just a few thousand years, we went from inventing the concept of land ownership to the people aren't just my property, they're part of the land. Like, what the fuck? But it's even worse than that. Like, as many slavery apologists have pointed out, very often the slave trade was fueled by colonial money on the coasts paying mercenaries in the center of the continent to capture other Africans. It was black people selling other black people because of the pressure from the colonials. But never mind that. There was slavery in Africa. Absolutely. People conquered other people, and instead of just killing them all, would enslave them. It was a better option.
Barbary slave trade was a thing, yes.
Yeah, all around the world. There have been slaves as long as there's been recorded history. But in every other culture, there were rules. There was an understanding that your slaves were human and had human rights. Every culture except in Christianity. In only in the antediluvian era, the triangle trade, slave trade era, were slaves considered, well, also the Spanish conquest, I have to admit that. Still Christian, though. Was it considered that slaves were property first and human a distant tenth? That they had no human rights? That they deserve nothing. If you murder them, no penalty.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. I don't know about various. I mean, but yeah, the different areas had different rules for them. For instance, when it was New Amsterdam, slaves could actually have the right to get married. Like when they were married, and they could get married. Basically, slaves could. They had marriage laws regarding slaves.
That's fair. I wasn't meaning to imply that all Christians behave that way. Just that it was when we observed that behavior, it was the Christians.
well, when it became New York, there was that was wiped out because the English side didn't believe. So it really depends on where you're looking at and the area that you're looking at, kind of thing. But yeah, the antebellum slave was absolutely brutal, and there was very, very minimal laws regarding, slaves and their rights, kind of thing. So yeah, I think as Exmus pointed out, slavery in China was brutal as well. There's been a lot of sort of brutal places around, the place where, I think that, but nobody is sort of holding up a book with slavery in it as a moral guide, because people hold up the Bible as a moral guide, but it has slavery rules in it. So yeah, but this whole thing of, Christians are part of the they fueled the abolition movement. Yeah, so did non-Christians. And yeah, it was largely Christians behind it, but Christians were the only people around at the time with the power to do anything about it. So it's not surprising it was the Christians, because they were the only people around at the time. And there was Christians opposing it as well.
Mm-hmm. And you can't take credit for Christians doing a good thing when the people opposing them were also Christians. Like, the Christians were doing the bad thing too.
Here's an idea. When the antebellum slave trade got started, right? So all of the newfound world was founded, started to capture slaves in Africa, and all of colonialism got started along with the slave trade. Could God have popped down for like 1 second to say, hey, don't do this? 1 second.
Yeah,
just saying.
He's omnipresent. He wouldn't even have to pop.
Correct. Yeah, actually, that's true. He's gone out for cigarettes.
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture.
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710, 1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out. And that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the
Enlightenment
Christians
who did it, but they weren't, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say.
And I just have to point out, Christianity is usually the last one in the boat on any moral issue you can point out. Like, gay rights, human rights, AIDS, like any moral issue you can point out. Not all of them, but usually Christianity is the last one on board. It seems to be following secular morality very distantly at this point. But, we're looking at places where the normal everyday people living there are more moral than the religions they purport to follow. I'll state that again. The people in those countries are more moral than the religions they purport to follow.
Yeah. Which is a really odd situation when you claim your morality comes from your religion.
Yes. So, like, I know Catholics that are like, yeah, well, we're Catholics, but, I don't like how they won't let women be priests. Yeah. Kind of immoral.
Mm-hmm.
That whole, women equality thing. They seem to have missed the memo from God on that one. Probably because the Bible clearly puts the man ahead of the woman, and that women shouldn't preach in church and things like that. Actually, I think it says they shouldn't speak in church from memory.
It's something along the lines of a woman shall not provide instruction to a man, and something like that.
Well, it definitely says that man's head of the household, like Jesus is the head of the church, basically, and that's New Testament.
Yeah, that's a Paul thing.
So if I was Alex, right, I would love that he said, "Oh, well, let's stick to the New Testament and go to that kind of stuff. Go to where the New Testament is pretty horrendous as well."
Mm-hmm. Slaves obey your masters, or when shit, what's his name? I want to say Ozymandias, but that's a different story. Fuck, I can't quite. It's a tip of the tongueism. The slave comes to Paul and says, I want you to write a letter to my master saying I'm a Christian now, I should be freed. And Paul writes the letter saying he's a Christian now. He's still your slave, though. It's all good.
Yeah, that's on the tip of my tongue. God, why can't I remember the name of him? As a runaway slave?
It's fuzzy in my head.
Philemon.
Let's just ask the Google.
Onesimus.
That's it.
Onesimus. And it was the letter to Philemon.
Yeah.
Yeah, which it's interesting that Paul goes. He doesn't go to he doesn't write to Philemon and say, "Hey, slavery is wrong," or "You've oppressed this person," or anything like that. He says, "Hey, Philemon, Onesimus is a friend of mine, and he's a brother in Christ. Could you please release him as a favor to me?" He doesn't say, like, he's not asking him to release him because it's wrong. He's asking to release him as a favor to Onesimus. He's not actually like sort of making this moral stance.
Mm-hmm. It's not moral, it's not religious, it's just I'm asking.
Yeah, I like this guy. And he even says in the letter, "I have no right to demand this of you." Right? He says, "I have no right to demand this of you, but as a favor, could you release Onesimus?" And then he sends the runaway slave back to his master.
Which is in violation of rabbinical law, Levitical law at the time, but whatever. It's the Old Testament laws, you know. You don't send a runaway slave back.
No. The context for that, if you actually listen to the context for that, it's runaway slaves from other countries you don't send back to their masters, not runaway slaves from your own. So because
the devil's in the details.
Well, you kind of like, and the historical context is that you taking their slaves and making them free inside your lands, or I mean, they weren't Israelites, but they were they had a caste of strangers in your land, basically, you know, and you can buy your slaves from those strangers. They had laws about that they would be strangers in the Israelite lands. So you're basically making yourself stronger while you're making your neighbors weaker, essentially. So I believe that's the context that it's in. So he's not violating that at all. The slaves from your own lands, you send back. So yeah,
And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel.
What? Racism came from the Enlightenment. Racism came from the Enlightenment. Are you serious?
Oh my goodness!
Maybe the term race, like the word racism, came from the Enlightenment. That's because people were just racist before, and they didn't even have a word for it, because it's like a fish probably don't have a word for water. Yeah, you know, it's just that's what you do. What the hell?
Their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New.
And if modern Enlightenment thinkers were beholden to think that these Enlightenment thinkers were ineffable creators of an inviolable ethic, then we'd probably have had a harder time getting rid of it, don't you think?
Well, nobody.
Do you think the abolitionist movement was helped or hindered by the existence of the verses that I've just described?
Well, I mean, I think it was hindered by them, because I think that the Southern apologists of slavery appeal to those verses, to be sure. They appeal to the Old Testament verses that were pro-slavery.
Tell me where you could appeal to be anti-slavery, specifically. I mean, not love your enemy, love your neighbor. Tell me specifically, like, here's how I can put it. You're in a time machine, you go back to antebellum slavery in the American South, and you find yourself on a plantation, and you say to the master of the house, you own a bunch of slaves, I don't think this is moral, I don't think you should be mistreating them. Where do they turn? And plausibly so, to justify what they're doing.
Well, the answer is
their Bible, and you can say to them, well, hold on, have you read this verse? Tell me the verse. Tell me where I can point this person in order to dispel them of their ideas
I would
about
recommend to you a compendium of sermons that were delivered by Northern preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
I want to know what the
right,
verses
so
are.
I'm going to give you their mode of preaching, because the key to it is to understand how
sermons,
they use the Bible.
not the Bible.
Not the way
Sermons, yeah. Not the Bible's text. Like, we don't,
you do it. Even the Southern theologians weren't dumb enough to say they enslaved the Amalekites, therefore you can enslave this guy who's here from the Congo. No, the Southerners didn't use those arguments either. Your arguments are in a different species altogether. If you look at the arguments,
he's dodging the whole thing. Like, why did God order this thing you say is immoral if God is perfectly moral? That's the question. That's the question. Because he's not forcing you to believe that happened. I mean, I've heard apologists go, well, it was just metaphor, which of course brings up the question, well, why is everything that is bad metaphor and everything that is good, happened for real? How do you tell the difference? But I've heard that argument before. It's better than saying what he's doing, which is other people have been immoral. Yeah, but other people aren't perfectly moral gods.
Between the Northerners and Southerners over slavery, they were far more nuanced than that. Basically, you had to do something like this. The Northern theologians would say this: are we or are we not created equal in the eyes of God? Yes or no? Yes. Are we all equally in need of salvation? Yes. Does God therefore love us all equally and make salvation available to us all? Yes.
And then you flip over
and all that being the case. So hold on. It takes a movement now to go from this theological truth to a political application. But I don't have to prove that this is plausible because it already happened.
It's far too vague. It's
far too vague for you. It's far from a skeptical compass. It's vague.
This always happens. This always happens.
But
now he's just trying not to let him talk now. That's all he's got left, is drown him out. Just drown him out. This is the worst kind of debate tactics, because you're just... This reminds me of what I see from a lot of flat earthers. They will just talk, and try and not let anybody talk at all. This is kind of who does this? Otangelo does this. This is Otangelo grade apologetics. Or who else does it? Mr. Batman or Nephilim Free grade apologetics.
Writing the mute button.
Well, no, Darth Dawkins sets up a script to sort of only let you answer. He'll let you answer as long as you're answering how he wants you to answer. This isn't letting him answer at all. Like this is Otangelo just droning on, or Nephilim Free just droning on without letting anybody else speak, kind of thing. Yeah, Mr. Batman does it as well. Yeah.
I'm saying millions of people believed it. They listened to these sermons. They acted on them.
That's because people retrospectively impart their own values.
Why do you think people in the North who had no stake in the matter signed up to fight the Civil War? Why did they do it?
I don't know.
You have no idea, right? You have no clue.
But I don't think because they read the Bible.
The people in the North who had no stake in the Civil War, they had no investment as to whether their country split in half.
Yeah.
Why would they do it? I mean, for fuck's sake. I understand that Dinesh is kind of a derp, full of deepities, but in our history classes, even teachers who would have been abolitionists back in the day make no bones about the fact that Lincoln was very clear that he said on multiple occasions and in a couple of speeches, if I could end the war today without freeing a single slave, I would do that. If I could end the war today and free every slave, I would do that. And if I could end the war today by freeing some slaves and leaving others in perpetual bondage, I would also do that, because the point is to end the damn war.
Yeah.
I'm saying that do you realize to what
look at the sermons that are being given. Look at the language that's being used. People talk about the Exodus story, for example. You know, the enslaved in Egypt, freed by God and brought into the promised land. And this is a story that is favored. This is a story that's favored by abolitionists to say, look at this anti-slavery spirit of something like Exodus, leaving out the fact that when the Israelites are liberated from Egypt and trying to take the promised land, they do so by slaughtering, genociding, and also then enslaving the people who are already living there. They leave out that bit. Because if they kept it in, then we'd realize that God did not have an anti-slavery essence. God had an anti-Israelite oppression sentiment. Well, and it's in the Old Testament, specifically the Israelites whose oppression he's upset with, and not only fine with the oppression of others, but mandates the oppression of others through the Israelites.
Okay, and all I'm saying is that there is a whole tradition that involves millions of slaves, millions of abolitionist preachers, Martin Luther King. None of them, not one of them, reads this story your way.
They just don't mention it. They just don't mention it.
Right, but isn't the significance of a text determined by the reading and use to which it is put? Let's say...
But we're not talking about how people are taking the text. We're talking about if these are real events that God ordered. Like, the fact that they don't read it this way, he admits that they genocided tribes. Is that moral or is that not moral? I feel like he's just dodging away, and kind of Alex is playing into him. He's kind of following him down this rabbit trail of, were there abolitionists who believed in Christianity? It's irrelevant. If God did everything in this book that it says, then you have to say that everything he does was moral. So the slaughter of the Amalekites is moral.
Yeah, it's so fucked up. I mean, even the Bible itself doesn't make the claim that God is perfectly moral. So this is a weird place to go when you're arguing whether the Bible is true or not. Dinesh is he's so far off topic. He's defending a claim that the thing he's supposed to be defending doesn't even make.
Yeah. It's weird.
For example, there's a story of murder, and everybody who reads that story becomes a wonderful citizen, loves their family, and you're the only guy who goes, oh no, really, guys, you're all misreading the text. It's really about murder, guys. And Martin Luther King goes, no. Slaves for hundreds of years have taken consolation in the Exodus. I mean, go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. To you, this is gobbledygook, because guess what the Israelites did next? And then Martin Luther King goes...
What did they do next?
Well, my point...
Like, what I would say to Martin Luther King...
He hasn't read the Bible, Alex. He doesn't know what the first chapter says, much less what happened in Exodus. I mean, come on now. Wow.
I agree about the description of the Bible. I'm simply saying that a Christian book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it. And if you come out with a quote, let's just say, for example,
don't put it in scare quotes. Like you can say, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And if I was trying to make a theological point, I would say, and then do what? What did they do next? Like, don't get me wrong. I am more than happy that Martin Luther King was able to make a theological case for the abolition of slavery. Fine. But I would say that he was
not for the abolition of slavery, but for civil rights.
He was misreading the text. Yeah, you're right.
We have about...
Well, here's the thing. The question isn't how did Martin Luther King. That isn't the question here when we're talking about moral truths. We're talking about, did God order the slaughter of these people, and is that moral? That's the question. How people interpret it is irrelevant, because Dinesh is saying that these events happened and it is moral, but somehow it's not moral today.
You can make an identical argument for Harry Potter. You could say there's plenty of valuable moral lessons in the Harry Potter series. There's the value of friendship. There's, fighting back against evil, standing up for the innocent, so on and so forth. But at the same time, you can't make a case that Harry Potter says slavery is wrong, because when Hermione's the only character who gives a crap about the slavery of the house elves, and every time she brings it up, everyone else, including our hero, makes fun of her for it.
Yep.
This is just the way of things. It's right and good that the house elves should be. In fact, the slaves like being slaves, and that's carried out in the story itself. When Hermione does free other house elves besides Dobby, they're miserable because, narratively speaking, they actually do prefer to be slaves, which is fucking wild. But whatever. Joanne has other problems besides that. But then Dinesh comes along and says, well, it doesn't matter whether it's really true or not. It's how the people who believe in it interpret it that determines if it's true. Like, the moral truth of a story, especially one with moral flaws, does not mean it is true.
Well, yeah, but this is okay. I have to clarify. This is what Alex is talking about with moral truths, right? So he's basically, so when we're thinking about moral truth, it's like the context is moral facts, right? So people will point to moral facts. Things that are factually, you're talking about moral realism, right? That there are moral standards that are factual regardless of anybody's stance of it, right? So so when you're pointing to something like this and saying, is it morally true? You're basically saying, does it comport with moral facts, like sort of independent morals kind of thing? And Dinesh is saying, yes, it is morally true. So the problem is that he's saying that genocide is immoral, but that's a moral fact in the Bible that he commanded genocide. So there's the dissonance that God is completely moral, but genocide, like God commanding you to commit genocide, is morally wrong. That's the dissonance. Because if somebody said, "Oh, well, God commanded me to commit genocide," that would be wrong. I can't believe I'm pointing this out. It's such a hot take, right?
Yeah, it's unfathomable. Like, I think that's why he brought up the Air Force pilot earlier with the bombing of 20,000 civilians. Like, I know it's immoral, but I was ordered to. Like, put yourself in Joshua's shoes. If Moses comes to you and says, God wants you to take the army and go wipe out that entire people, that whole city, all the people, even the cats and dogs and sheep and goats and things. Can you even say no? Like, you can say, that's a horrible command. That why would God do that? And then Moses goes, oh, well, you can't understand the ways of God. His ways are above our ways, or whatever fucking priestly thing he offers as an excuse. But if it's a God saying it, can you even refuse?
I guess you can if free will's a thing, but you wouldn't want to, right? It's all punishment and smiting. I mean, if he's willing to smite someone for using strange incense, disobeying him, I mean, he's willing to slaughter children with a she-bear because they laugh at a bald guy. What will he do to the person that refuses his command? There's got to be at least two she-bears in there for you.
I mean, that could have changed the whole course of history, assuming any of that ever happened, which it probably didn't. If Joshua stood up to Moses and said, that's a horrible thing, I will not do it.
Right.
And then nothing happened to him. That would it wouldn't disprove the God, but it would call into question whether Moses really had his full attention,
Yeah, but I think something would happen to him, but it might be at the hands of everybody else, because a lot of the time God doesn't actually do the grunt work himself. Like, the person that picked up sticks was stoned to death. He wasn't, God didn't smite him for that. He apparently needed people for that for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
a bit inconsistent, but there you go.
5 minutes, guys.
Not the other way around. It's like we have to ask who's misreading the text. And let's just suppose for a moment that you could point me, which you still haven't done, to a single verse, even in the New Testament, which tells me that slavery is a bad thing. Which, by the way, St. Paul writes in I can't remember which. I wish I could remember which letter it is. But you'll know what I'm talking about, where he writes, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the good ones, but also to the cruel," or the fruit, as the King James has it. It's like, if it were the case that even if you could, which I'd still love for you to do, point to a single verse in the New Testament that tells me that slavery is actually not so good, the fact that so obviously God is okay with it in the Old Testament means that even if you could do that, the best we're left with is that we have a text here which can say one thing on one day and another thing the next.
If you don't understand, if you don't read,
I'm sure I've arrived more people than that on the way in. So,
if you don't read the Bible in the way that the Christians do, then I'm trying to understand what is you're essentially a kind of a new interpreter who's saying that, first of all, texts are always open to interpretation, right? So if I say, for example,
yeah, it's funny how it's infallible when it needs it to be, and it's just up to interpretation when you don't need it to be.
Mm-hmm. I was also finding a bit of irony from another perspective. There's my Jewish friends tell me that there's this principle in the study of the scriptures that a text is considered dead when you can no longer find new meanings and interpretations within it. That's one of the reasons that non-believers like Kip Davis are so enthralled with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the other ancient texts, because you're constantly getting new meanings and new information out of this stuff, even though it's thousands of years old. Whereas the Christian perspective, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, the way they take it is slightly different, but the underlying fundamental principle is there is one true way to read the Bible, and everything else is false. Those are false teachings. It's interesting that they're diametrically opposed. Like Dinesh is saying, there's one correct interpretation. You're doing it wrong, Alex. But Jewish scholars looking at the same Old Testament texts would say, no, there's thousands of ways to read this.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and not to mention that Christians can't agree on their text. Like, let's face it, he's like, oh, you've got to read the Christians. Which ones? They disagree a lot. I don't know if you've been paying attention, Dinesh, but they don't all agree. That's why there is the Baptists and the Presbyterians and the Pentecostals and I could sit here for hours sort of naming all of the denominations that all disagree with each other on stuff.
Yeah, if you had a list of all the denominations, which all split over doctrine, which, is what's heresy and what isn't, how do we interpret this passage or whatever, if you had a list of them and you read out one every 5 seconds, we'd be here for over an hour.
Do you know who else is Christian? The Ku Klux Klan.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure they read it in the same way Alex is. Just saying.
Well, the meaning of the Oedipus story is the
Oedipus? Are you talking about Onesimus? The Oedipus story. Oedipus? We're talking about the Greek figure that killed his father and married his mother. Like, it's a Greek tragedy. Oedipus?
If he means Oedipus, I think that would be the one he means, yes.
Okay.
Quest for truth, no matter where that takes you. And that is the meaning of the Sophoclean hero. The Sophoclean hero is isolated, Antigone, Oedipus. They hold on to a truth no matter what, however unpleasant, however dangerous. It often takes them to their destruction or their death. And that is the way in which let's just say a student of ancient Greek drama, reads this work. And that is the way that the work has always been read. You come along and say, let's just say you're Sigmund Freud.
Oedipus, okay.
He's a student of ancient Greek drama, and that's the way it's always been read, according to Dinesh. But no, if Dinesh's interpretation were the correct way, then the message is, don't hold on to truth because it will lead you to certain destruction. wild take.
Wow. But he's going to hold on to that thing to his destruction. Okay. You don't think it was like these tragedies are not a cautionary tale? No, they're endorsing. Gotcha.
Yeah,
And
and
you go,
also,
no.
the fuck does it have to do with the Bible?
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, the work really means something very different. People have a secret lust for their moms, and this is repressed. Now, it's a very interesting interpretation, but it's sort of like I'm telling you, well, no Christian reads it that way. You're like, but there it is in the text.
Sometimes a genocide is just a genocide.
I'm not denying the facts as described. It's the wiping out of the Amalekites.
Yeah, as ordained by the God that you believe in.
As ordered by Yahweh.
So just to ask a direct yes or no question, appreciate a direct yes.
Wonderful. Alex brings it back to what's important. Yeah, well done. Don't let him get away from the pivotal matter. God ordered something that you consider immoral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that
Alex
has to
was
fit
showing.
along.
I respect the hell out of Alex, partly for his clear-sightedness, but also partly for his restraint. Remember, he has a double degree in philosophy as well as theology, and he's very experienced with debates. He's gone up against Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, but also little people that you've never freaking heard of. He's done a bunch of debates. That's how he got to be famous. So he, both from experience and from academic study, understands sophistry and rhetoric and all the logical fallacies.
Yeah.
And his ability to not call out the bullshit that Dinesh is doing.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have that kind of restraint. Not for long.
For this. The God that you believe in is the moral author of the universe. Morally justifiably commanded the slaughter of innocent children and women. Yes or no?
In the Old Testament, yes.
There you have it. So now we've covered historical, metaphorical, allegorical, and now moral truth. And I suppose it can only be up to the audience to decide whether they think that this is true.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right, everyone, let's do a big round of applause for Dinesh and Alex. Wow.
Okay. Well, that looks like it's it.
Yeah. Alex kind of, he segued into an ending very smoothly, almost like he's done this a whole bunch of times.
But I love how he mentioned, and they didn't really have closings, but he mentioned it at the end kind of thing. He just touched on and spotlighted all of those things he brought up, and he pulled it full circle and brought up all of the things that he said in the start. Like, so we're talking about sort of moral truth. Is it morally true, or metaphorically true, or allegorically true, or really true? You know, like he basically highlighted that as a last thing to leave that in the audience's mind. And for my money, I don't. What was strange is that Dinesh didn't attach himself to any one of these things. He kind of went all of the above. But you can't really have something being true in reality and metaphorically true at the same time. Like, how does that work?
Well, I think maybe you could. I'd have to concoct a scenario, but maybe you could. But I think it's more subtle than that, the way Alex ended things, because remember, the debate topic is the Bible true? Which means Dinesh had the positive position and therefore the burden of proof. And Alex, in wrapping it up, he posed it as a neutral summation. You know, we've covered these topics, and we'll have to leave it to the audience. But the subtext is that Dinesh failed to make a case on all of these points.
Yeah.
And so, granted, they didn't follow formal rules of debate, but under the formal rules, since the positive proposal failed to make its case, Alex won.
Yeah. I think he absolutely wiped the floor with Dinesh. Like, Dinesh was, I mean, the moment for me where I went, oh, Dinesh is just slimy, is where he was sitting there talking constantly, and while Alex is trying to get a word in edgewise, and he actually says, "Well, you're just filibustering," and my jaw just dropped. I cannot understand how anybody looking at that, even a Christian, would go, "No, it was definitely Alex filibustering." I don't understand that.
Yeah, you'd have to be a Dinesh fanboy, pulling the same sort of stuff that Trump Luddites do. Oh, Trump, he's so wise and so moral and such a wonderful guy. We looking at the same person here?
Right.
And
right.
And people, they not only have bias, but they justify their bias by accusing others of bias.
Yeah.
I don't like Trump because I've seen how he leads. Before he ran for president, I actually kind of liked him. I didn't really know much about him, but he was in a couple of movies and he was famous and whatever. And I've been to his casino, So I'm like, what exposure I've had has been in the positive direction. So I was predisposed to like him. The fact I don't like him is because of reality, not because I had a bias,
I don't think I liked him. But I barely knew about Trump. Like, outside of the United States, he wasn't a thing. All that I know is that he was a rich guy that sold steaks at some random place and had and I found his I'm not a big fan of reality shows, and I found The Apprentice to be because I'm not a huge fan of that sort of having worked in corporations myself and worked in the corporate world, I dislike mean people and that 80s style of corporate culture. That sort of, you know, kill or be killed, get ahead of everybody by stamping the opposition down. That kind of stuff. Like, that went out in the 80s. Like, now it's teamwork and all working together to meet common goals. More than ever, corporations are looking for teamwork above everything else, because you've got to be able to work with other people. People that are this, well, I'm going to get ahead by any means necessary, are really badly positioned these days. So I didn't like him particularly much, but I barely knew about him, to be honest with you.
Different exposures. Like for what I just said, I never saw The Apprentice because I haven't watched television in decades. I just don't have time. So I was never exposed to that side of his personality.
Well, I don't think I've watched an entire episode. I've just seen YouTube with clips of him on and went, wow, that is a horrible boss. That guy would be awful to work for. Just horrendous to work for. He's such an ass. So that's, but it wasn't like I was like, oh, he's the worst person and a fascist kind of thing. No, it was just a, bit of a tool, to be honest with you. So, but, obviously my experience of him was pretty negative. Yeah. But, that's going to be on my Wednesday or Tuesday night for those in Eastern time. I'm going to have a special debate dissection by popular demand. I'm thinking of what to call it. Geriatric democracy.
Old man. Two old men fight over one house. That's too long for a title, but
it's too long for a title. I don't know. US Bowls Club. I don't know. Do you guys have Bowls Club? Is that a thing over there? We have Bowls Club.
What is that?
It's like lawn bowling. It's like lawn bowling, and old people go and they do Bowls Club, which is like a club with the lawn, and you play lawn bowls. It's a weird game in Australia. It's what everybody does when they're old.
Oh, yeah. Our old people play shuffleboard.
Okay. Okay, shuffleboard. And bingo, of course. You guys have
bridge.
Bingo as well, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, bridge. Yeah. Gotcha. No, it's not bokeh. It's lawn bowls. It's lawn bowls. I feel like I'm being gaslit here because it's so big over here.
It may be a thing, seriously. And I've just never heard of it. It happens.
It's such a big thing over here. Hang on a sec. Let's see. Let's find a good picture of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm low-key excited for being 80 years old and getting to play card games with my surviving friends all day.
Yeah. Maybe it's an Australian thing. I have no idea.
It could be we call it something different, and it's just not. I mean, around here we have people call things different things all the damn time, and it drives me crazy.
Oh,
there's a
lawn bowls are a popular sport and leisure activity in Australia. Okay, so maybe it is just Australia. All right, we've got this thing called lawn bowls, and that's generally your demographic. Lawn bowls important. How dare you? You get out of here, head kamikaze. How dare you?
Oh boy. Yeah, your old people stay more physically active. They like go out and do stuff.
Yeah. Hell, I don't even go out and do stuff, mate. I can't make that claim. All right. Well, that was yeah, Alex is fantastic. Wow, is he fantastic. Yeah, and Dinesh is terrible. Like just terrible. He was definitely pincered in that one. Like, holy crap, he didn't know which way to run. And like I said, a part of it, I think he was just throwing things and seeing what stuck. And nothing stuck. You know, they're so poor arguments. He really was struggling. And from the very start, he couldn't look at Alex. He couldn't look comfortable. He just seemed, yeah.
Couldn't even look at Alex. Had to go for the audience.
Yeah.
I'm still really curious what that book was.
I hope it was a Bible on a, is the Bible true? I hope it wasn't like, just some random travel book like, visit the Caucasus Islands kind of thing.
Maybe it was a phone book. That's one of the definitions of hell, having a phone book and no phone.
Maybe it was a dictionary. Maybe it was a thesaurus. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so you've got a big week coming on. I've got a big week, but a big thing is, and I'm gonna present the thumbnail for this because I made it and I'm very proud of it. Because it was really good. So you are in a debate that I am holding. It should be fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's in a few weeks, isn't it? From memory.
Yeah, we put it in like the middle of July-ish, I think.
Yeah, I'll look up the date exactly because it's going to be amazing. And lots of people are interested in this one, which kind of surprises me. I was more doing it just for funsies, but it surprises me. People are really interested in it. So, yeah, maybe a good topic. It is my 15th and it's the 14th. The 14th. It is Friday, isn't it? Oh.
Maybe. Let's see.
Oh no, July. I'm looking at the wrong month.
Yes, July.
Sunday, the 14th of July, and it will be 14th. My 14th night or 14th morning. So Sunday, the 14th in the morning for those US people, is going to be a debate between Ember and our very own Al Trucker, which is amazing and awesome. And it's going to be, bam, the great Marvel versus DC debate. Come on. Yep. You want to be around for this one because it's going to get feisty. I know it, which I wouldn't want it any other way. But yeah, place your bets. And that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks now, actually. I can't believe it's the 30th. It's crazy. Anyway, do you have anything else to add, Ember? Any other thoughts? Anything else?
We pretty much covered all the salient bits to do a quick recap. Alex was on topic pretty much the whole time. Dinesh avoided the topic like it was the plague, which his all-mortal god sent. And yeah, Alex nailed the recap. Dinesh failed to land an argument on any of the subjects they tried to cover.
He tried.
Yeah. So, yeah, it wasn't just embarrassing for Dinesh. Like he showed his ass so many times, but like very often you don't have a winner in debates. It really is up to the audience to decide. But this one's pretty clear.
Yeah, I
Alex
would be
destroyed him.
I would be amazed if even, I would imagine that most Christians would say, hey, he did his best, wasn't the greatest performance, and we have those as well. We go, hey, they did their best, wasn't the greatest performance, kind of thing. Like it happens. But it kind of, he got annihilated. But I mean, let's face it, he's going up against somebody on, the Bible with theology and philosophy against barely journalism. It's not even, was this punching down?
Well, I don't think so, because Dinesh actually has the greater name recognition. He's the more celebrated thinker, if you want to call it that. But also, it's not like Alex went out of his way to pick on Dinesh. Like Pangburn set it up, and they both agreed,
Hmm. And I guess Dinesh is very vocal about it, kind of thing. I think that he has thrown his own weight into the ring. Like no one's forced him to get in and duke it out against philosophy majors. So yeah, he's sort of come in, but yeah. So no, I guess not. And he's got a pretty big following, so I guess not. I just feel like he was outclassed in every way.
Yeah, it was a very thorough thwumping.
All right. Well, I think we'll call it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me, and thank you, Ember, for joining me. We'll be back on Ember's channel next week, doing I'm not sure what, something amazing, something to really mull over. We will be doing a review on a debate over there. Again, thank you for joining me. Please do join me on Tuesday night Eastern time for the great geriatric debate. I don't know what I'm going to call it, but yes, I'll be looking at Biden versus Trump and seeing
octogenarians in the octagon.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. I'm going to steal that. The great octogenarian octagon debate. I don't know what I'm going to call it. That's awesome. But don't forget, as always, be kind to yourself. Be kind to each other, especially if you disagree with them over which is better, Marvel or DC. It's not you don't have to fight one. It's fine. We can each have our own tastes. It's fine.
But one of us is objectively correct.
Oh, that's fantastic. Senile Showdown. That is awesome.
Ooh,
I love it.
Ooh, that is
yeah. Senility Showdown. Nice. That's really good, Pandora's. I like that. I'm gonna give you a big winner for that one. Winner, chicken dinner. Anyway, do take care, everybody, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Good night.